The robot stood in front of a bright blue flash, while the plot told us that a war had come that would decide the fate of humanity. Energy began to spread. Dark wings appeared from the portal. The demon raised his hands above his head, and we were told that the enemy army was led by a monster that had come to Earth from space. Many monsters appeared on the battlefield. The guy was shocked by what he saw. A black dragon appeared from the portal. The stranger's eyes glowed brightly. Flames enveloped the robot. Fire mana appeared in the guy's hand, and we were told that at the same time, those called superhumans began to appear among people. The dragon flew in the sky, and the plot told us that a huge number of superhumans died fighting, and the victory of humanity seemed to be just around the corner. The dragon flew into the sky. His eyes glowed brightly. The man wrote with a pen that the monsters would return 15 years later. We were shown the company logo and told that this was the prophecy of the superhuman oracle. The children's eyes began to glow, and the plot told us that an institution for the development of superpowers called ARC was created. Children with innate superpowers were sent to it. They were prepared for the final battle with the enemy, and there were 3 years left before the battle. The guy clenched his hand into a fist. The robot was walking through a dark space. He suddenly stopped. His gaze fell on a demon who was summoning an army of monsters. The guy was shocked by what he saw. He began to shoot from a machine gun at the monsters. The demon's head flew apart. The man was stunned. A powerful explosion was heard in front of him. The stranger stood in a cloud of dust. Beads of sweat were running down his face. A bright flash of blue light appeared in front of him. Suddenly a dragon appeared. His face was furious. The dragon flew at him. The guy could not move from what he saw. He threw the machine gun on the ground. His suit suddenly caught fire. The man began to burn alive. The guy woke up in a cold sweat. Sitting at the table, he said he had that dream again. The stranger held his head and frowned. He was suddenly surprised and noted that the last of the recruits were arriving today. Helicopters were flying over the island. The strapped-in guy was sitting in the helicopter. His face was serious. Sitting at the table, the man said it was impressive. Chuck became the leader of orphan saboteurs at the age of 10. Putting his hand on his file, the soldier said that the main character was not going to prison, then asked if the boy had heard of the ARC facility. Chuck presented the logo of this company. Looking at the soldier, he asked if the man meant the ARC facility for the development of superhuman abilities and if they thought he was superhuman. The soldier replied with a satisfied look that Chuck was a smart guy, noting that he would tell him more. He was not just a Superman. He was the future savior of humanity. He was starting a new life, well-fed, with a roof over his head. He would sleep on a bed. The enraged protagonist replied that a well-fed life would be only for him alone, but not for his brothers. Frowning, Chuck said that if they wanted to send him to the ARC, then his condition was that they take responsibility for his brothers, their food, shelter, education, everything. The man listened to him attentively. Standing opposite, he replied that he agreed to such conditions. The protagonist was suddenly taken aback. The soldier said that their agreement was valid exactly as long as he remained in the institution. Chuck looked at him and said that he understood this. He was standing at the exit of the helicopter. He remembered standing in front of the military man and hearing that superpowers are divided into ranks and that his rank is low. Chuck stepped onto the ground. Walking along the runway, the protagonist noted that he would do everything to survive because the fate of his brothers was important to him. The protagonist was moving toward the company building. He clenched his hand into a fist. Shifting his gaze, Chuck was surprised. He noticed a crowd of children screaming for someone to come home. The guys surrounded the tearful boy and said that he was brought there, and he was crying. Clenching his hand into a fist, the guy said that it was because of people like him that they looked at conscripts as zeros without a stick. The boy continued to cry. The guys standing behind asked how the guy was better and who he was. He called them fools with burning eyes. A powerful aura enveloped the body of the stranger, who asked not to compare themselves to him. His innate abilities were unattainable for them. The stranger grinned and noted that he was an experienced superhuman. The children were stunned and began to shout that they had never seen a real superhuman in action before. The stranger pointed his hand at the beaten boy and asked if he would be sent home if he was injured, adding that he would not survive in this institution anyway. He happily emphasized the fact that the boy would thank him later. Simon threw a rock and told the boy to go home. Chuck suddenly caught the flying rock. Looking at the rock, the protagonist said that it was slow and that it would be faster to throw it with his hand. Taken aback, Simon asked who he was. Chuck looked at him and said that he was a teacher of good manners. The soldier walked towards a crowd of kids who were shouting about a fight. A powerful aura was emanating from him. The kids suddenly stopped fighting. The kids stepped aside and made way for the soldier. Looking at Chuck and Simon, he ordered them to stand still and ask their names. The boys stood still and introduced themselves. The soldier asked with a serious expression if Simon's superpower had manifested itself, noting that he was undergoing training. Standing in front of the soldier, Simon replied that he had only manifested telekinesis so far. The man hit the child. The guy was shocked by this. Standing over him, The soldier cried out that he had only awakened one ability and he was already stuck up. Chuck frowned at this. The soldier turned his attention to the protagonist and said that he approved of his tendency to help those who were weaker, only if his ability was even lower than Simon's. Then he was an even bigger fool. He hit the protagonist in the stomach. Chuck flew to the side while the man said that in 3 weeks the first school year would begin, and anyone who had not shown any superpowers by that time would be expelled. The dumbfounded protagonist tried to get up. The guy with a serious look said that it was late introducing himself. His name was John. He was their instructor. During the training period, they had to transform from bio-garbage into combat superhumans and defeat the dragon and his army. Looking at John, the guys heard that they were starting training. They would run around the stadium and would not stop until their instructor said stop. He ordered them to run with an enraged look. Chuck started running and heard that they would be expelled for stopping. The children fell to the ground saying that they could no longer run. John, with an enraged look, screamed that they were useless scum who should leave the institution and not interfere with others. Pointing his finger to the side, he noted that they were expelled. The protagonist continued to run and thought that he was used to physical work, but he was worried about his superpower. He tried to catch up with Simon and wondered if he could awaken it like this guy. Frowning, Chuck asked if he even had a superpower. The boy suddenly stumbled. Beads of sweat were running down his face. He rolled his eyes. The boy fell to the ground. John kept his hands in his pockets and called him a runt. Lying on the ground, the boy tried to say that he could not run anymore. He was suddenly taken aback. John watched him closely. Chuck picked the boy up and said that he did not say that he gave up. The protagonist looked at him and clarified if this was true. The tearful guy answered that it was true. John continued to watch silently. Chuck ran away from there, holding the boy next to him. Evening came. Raising the whistle to his mouth, John screamed that it was time to stop. The protagonist fell to the ground. Standing in front of the children, the military man said that out of 73 people, 40 remained. Frowning, John noted that they were done for today. Tomorrow the real training would begin. This run was just a warm-up and they would do it every day. The children were shocked by what they heard. Chuck's face was serious. The next day came and the sun's rays enveloped the base. The boys started running again at 5 in the morning. They were sitting at the table and having breakfast at 8 in the morning. John stood on the stage in front of the boys and told them that they needed to find the source of their superpower with their inner eye. Concentrate. It could be in the head, sometimes in the heart, and sometimes in the lower chakra. They needed to catch the image. Touching the heart, Chuck emphasized that he would try to look there. It was afternoon tea and the main character put food on a tray. The main character was walking towards the lonely guy. He sat down next to Kyle and offered to eat together. Embarrassed, Kyle agreed, and Chuck noted that this was the first person he had made friends with in the ARC institution and in life in general. The main character, with a smile on his face, wished them a bon appetit. He noticed Simon, who approached him. The boys met eyes. Watching him go, Kyle said that he heard that he had taken a course for gifted children in the UK, holding a spoon in his hands. Chuck replied that it pissed him off, but he really did have superpowers. Before anyone else, he hoped in 3 weeks they would also learn telekinesis. Putting a finger to his cheek, Kyle said that he could use telekinesis. The puzzled protagonist replied that it turned out that Kyle was not an easy guy. Evening came, and the plot told us that then there were evening classes, combat practices, and an evening run. The guys lay down on the bed. Frowning, Chuck thought about the fact that he could not fall asleep. He looked at the ceiling and noted that he had a shower, food, a pillow, a blanket. He had never seen such good conditions in his life, but he still really wanted to go home. The protagonist began to shake his head and said that he could not. His face was serious until he came to the conclusion that he should not be a weakling. The plot takes us to 2 weeks later when the guys have mastered telekinesis. Sitting at the table, Chuck was trying to lift a pen using telekinesis. He wondered with a dumbfounded look what he should do and whether he really had any superpowers. The protagonist remembered how Kyle looked away and said that he could not help him in any way. He could not explain how to learn it. Simon was sitting on the bench. He asked Chuck with a smirk on his face what he needed. The protagonist stood in front of him. Closing his eyes, Simon noted that he himself knew that Chuck wanted to know the theory. Smirking, Simon asked why the protagonist did not bow to him, adding that he thought that in their country good manners were instilled from childhood. The protagonist was taken aback by what he heard and noted that his pride had nothing to do with it. Chuck knelt down. Looking at the guy, he asked to teach him telekinesis. Simon frowned. He closed his eyes. Looking away, the guy said he would teach him, but the protagonist shouldn't complain later. He held a pencil in his hands. Simon stabbed Chuck in the chest. The dumbfounded protagonist asked what happened. The helicopter was flying in the sky. John looked out the window and smoked a cigar. Looking up, he said that the enlistment day had come too soon. The man opened the door. He called out to John with a smile on his face. Looking into the office, the man noted that he knew he would find him. Octo covered his nose with his fingers and said that smoking was prohibited there. He sat down on the chair and said that he thought he would drop by for the enlistment ceremony, after which he clarified how John liked the new recruits. The guy answered with a serious look that they were a bunch of cannon fodder. Crossing his arms, John added that 2 of them were good for something. He imagined the boy controlling the stone and told him that one of them was named Simon. He had a bad temper, but his skills were high. He was at least a year ahead of the program. Holding his chin, Octo noted that he was a genius graduate of the Royal Institution for the Training of Superhumans. He had high expectations for him. Putting his hands in his pockets, John said that the other one. He remembered how Chuck helped Kyle up and said that he was an altruistic type. He had much more strength than the others. Looking away, John thought that this was the perfect little soldier. Only the Ark Institution needed superhumans, not just people. He remembered how the dragon flew in the sky and emphasized that if the main character did not have powers, then he did not belong there. Puzzled, Octo waited for John to continue the story. Pointing his finger, Octo said that while he was climbing up to him, he heard something interesting about John's nickname. Because of his eyes, they call him a bastard. The doctor's face was satisfied. John stood in front of the children. Holding his hands behind his back, he shouted that today would be the enrollment for the first year of training. Simon listened to him attentively. Frowning, the soldier noted that only those who were ready to use superpowers in battle were subject to enrollment. The protagonist stood quietly. John's eyes began to glow brightly and he told that the simplest superpower is an external effect, manifested by the glow of the eyes. If they have not learned telekinesis, it does not matter who can do the external effect, enrollment. John pointed his finger at the doctor and shouted that everyone who can produce an external effect, line up there, in front of the engineer. He looked at the agent and added that those who cannot go there and people will take them home by helicopter. The protagonist was shocked by what he heard. He noticed a soldier among the crowd. The children began to disperse. Chuck continued to stand quietly. Kyle turned around and looked at him. Closing his eyes, the protagonist touched his heart. He remembered how Simon pierced his chest with a pencil. The protagonist was taken aback by this. Chuck was writhing in pain. Looking at the wound, the protagonist asked if Simon wanted to say that this was a way to learn. Trying to catch his breath, the protagonist emphasized the fact that Simon wanted to kill him. Holding a pencil in his hand, Simon replied that it was nothing serious. The wound was shallow and Chuck should now focus on the pain because this wound was now his channel of power. The protagonist was taken aback by what he heard. Sitting in front of him, the boy said that Chuck should pull out energy through this wound and should not think that this was impossible to achieve without injury. Even if he stood for several days holding his chest, nothing would happen. Looking at him, the protagonist came to the conclusion that Simon knew that his source of power was in his heart. Holding his chest, Chuck noted that from that day on, he finally began to feel it, the internal energy that he could not take under control. Frowning, the protagonist wondered what he should do to get her out. Furious, John called out to him. Standing in front of him, he noticed that the protagonist was the last one, after which he ordered him to stand in line. Closing his eyes, Chuck noted that he had to do it. There was no way back for him. Veins appeared on John's face from anger. He began to walk towards the protagonist. The guys were watching what was happening carefully. Approaching Chuck, the military man said that a soldier must always obey the orders of a superior. Swinging his fist, John added that there were no exceptions. Frowning, the protagonist thought that he needed to figure out how to act in this situation now. He noticed a pen sticking out of John's pocket. He looked at it closely. John delivered a powerful blow to the protagonist. Chuck had a pen in his hands. He raised it above his head and suggested that the channel of power was not open enough. John watched him. The protagonist plunged the pen into his heart and noted that if so, he would open it further. The guys were taken aback by what they saw. John grabbed Chuck and asked if he was going to die. Blood was dripping onto the ground. The protagonist's eyes began to glow. John was surprised by what he saw. Sighing, he let the protagonist go. Leaving there, John said that he had never met such a mediocrity. He lowered his head. Turning around, the soldier noted that Chuck at least deserved congratulations. The beaten protagonist was sitting on the ground. Putting his hand on his chest, the protagonist noted that he was accepted into the institution. Now his journey begins. A tearful Kyle ran up to him and asked how he was, to which he received the answer that everything was fine. Waving his hand, Octo cried out that he had a gift for Chuck in honor of his admission. He put a watch on his wrist and cried out that this was the newest gadget he had developed. This was not just a bracelet, this was a device. A projection of the protagonist appeared on the watch. The surprised protagonist said that this was unbelievable. John seriously exclaimed that he would now separate them into classes. When he called their rank, they would stand in a separate row. Raising his hand, he noted that the ARC grading system was a B, C, D. Their class was determined by how they performed in 3 weeks, but they should remember that for merit and hard work on their abilities, they can increase their rank. The protagonist listened to this attentively. Putting his hands behind his back, John congratulated the remaining recruits and stated that they thought he was a scumbag. Octo listened to this with a smile on his face. John with a mad grin emphasized the fact that he was not just a scumbag, he was the most evil scumbag they would ever meet. Simon stood apart. Because he was the only recruit of Class A, Kyle stood next to the guys, after which John noted that there were 4 recruits in Class B. He looked at the tablet. Chuck stood quietly and thought that even though he was in D class, he would still advance in rank. Leaving there, the military man noted that the top 5 would go with him, and the remaining 20 people would go with Instructor Chase. The man stood in front of the guys. The kids were scared by the sight of Chase and thought that he was huge. He looked even scarier than Sergeant John. Smiling, Chase introduced himself and noted that it would not be easy, but they should try together. The guys were shocked that Chase was kind and they got a good instructor. Simon walked in front of the line. He turned his gaze. The guy passed by the main character. Chuck was suddenly surprised. His gaze fell on the tearful Kyle. Kyle walked on and heard the words of the main character that everything was fine and soon he would be in the same class with him. A joyful Kyle started running. Chase raised his fist to his face and ordered everyone to go to the gym. Sunlight enveloped the building. Chase held a stick in his hands. He began to skillfully spin it. The children were shocked by what he saw. The protagonist watched Chase's every move. Standing in front of the children, the soldier assumed that they were already wondering why they needed to know how to handle spears and swords if they were going to fight a dragon. The fact is that they would need to wield energy weapons. Chase imagined a dragon's mouth and told them that there was no matter in the world that could hold a mental charge of energy, and only the skin and bones of a dragon could hold and transmit energy. Various weapons appeared in his imagination, and he noted that therefore only weapons created from dragon components could injure dragons. Frowning, the protagonist asked how they killed the dragons if they did not have such weapons back then. Chase looked down. Closing his eyes, he said that in that battle, the superhumans fought him only hand to hand. One dragon destroyed hundreds. People released green streams of mana from their hands, and Chase added that some superhumans worked on the dragon from a distance, but it was possible to finish off the dragon only from a close distance. The task was to deliver a fatal blow with the right weapon for releasing energy. The man in the robot suit held a huge blade in his hands, after which the soldier noted that such a task was performed by soldiers called strikers. The guys were surprised by what he heard. Pointing his finger at the stand, Chase offered to pick a weapon from them for each. The main character took the spear in his hands. Chase stood in front of him and asked if he liked the spear, to which he received a positive answer. Looking at the soldier, Chuck said that when he demonstrated, he liked the speed and whistle of the spear. Chase remembered the protagonist grabbing a pen and noting that the calculation and force with which he attacked Sergeant John were impossible not to notice. It was obvious that he grew up in very harsh conditions. Closing his eyes, the man noted that, unfortunately, the protagonist already had experience in fighting. Chuck said with a smile that he would try. Putting his hands on his hips, Chase added that he would help him in everything. The joyful protagonist looked at the spear in his hands. He was fighting a guy. Chuck was in a fighting stance. His opponent was looking at him intently. Grinning, the protagonist asked if Rick was tired and whether it was time to give up. The joyful boy replied that it was obvious from Chuck that he was saving his strength and not rushing into battle. The spear was flying at the protagonist's face. The protagonist managed to dodge the attack. He parried Rick's blow. The boy dropped the spear from his hands. They continued to fight. Raising his hands, Rick said that he surrendered. They shook hands and Rick informed the protagonist that he was already aware that he was being promoted to Class C next week and that the class would need a new class representative. His face was pleased. Pointing his finger at Chuck, Rick suggested that he was the best fit, after which the protagonist replied that it was not up to him. Pointing at the boys, Rick noted that they were choosing him. They had already discussed it. Holding his head, the protagonist thanked them. Looking at the building, the protagonist wondered if he would be one step away from a promotion if he became class representative. Furious, John replied that he was not. Standing in front of him, Chuck wondered why this was so familiar to him. The guy was lifting a dumbbell and saying that he often got it from Sergeant John. A student was running on a treadmill and asking who he was fighting, a first grader. Meanwhile, Chuck held a spear in front of his opponent. The man was lighting a cigar. A boy and his friends were shouting from the window that they wished him luck, let him beat him. John looked away and said that they were fools. The boy grinned angrily. The sergeant pointed his finger at him and asked if this chick was the only one who wanted to be a prefect. Were they that stupid? This retarded guy couldn't even use telekinesis. He was waiting for an explanation. John stood in front of the boys in the room. Frowning, the man said that they should tell him why the hell he should appoint him their prefect, why they trusted him. The protagonist looked at him in surprise. The sergeant broke a mop with his foot. He threw a stick forward. The protagonist caught it in confusion. John stood in front of the boy and said that he was told that he was the best in the class at spear fighting, let him fight him. Frowning, he asked if the boy really thought he could hurt him with a sharpened stick with his insignificant skills. The man on the street threw his jacket back. Chuck looked at him warily and asked if he was going to fight hand to hand. The sergeant looked at him with displeasure and asked if he thought he needed a gun to fight a child. John threw his cigar aside and said that the rules were simple. If any part of his body touched the ground, such as an elbow or a knee, then he won, and the boy would lose only if he surrendered himself. The main character grinned and said that then he definitely would not lose. Chuck confidently swung the spear. The man raised his fists. The children watched from the window and discussed how well trained this kid was, but still, how could he defeat the instructor? Simon pushed the children aside and asked them to make way for him. He crossed his arms on the windowsill and said that the boy was crazy. Chuck pulled out his spear with a shout. The sergeant parried the blow with his hand. The man dodged the attack. John frowned. The protagonist jumped over his opponent. The boy hit him in the arm. The opponent grabbed him by the shirt. He hit the child with his knee. The sergeant swung his leg at the student. The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise. The man kicked him. Chuck went down on one knee. The protagonist tried to catch his breath, wondering if he really was trying to kill him. John looked at him mercilessly and asked why he was looking at him like that, adding that the dragon and his army kill everyone, they don't care who he is. Imagining a monster attacking people, he said that he will not do anything good to him, even if he knows he is weak. Chuck held onto his spear and listened as if he were facing an enemy army, the current situation would seem insignificant to him. Holding the stick in front of him, the boy asked if he would fight or talk. The sergeant swung it and said that he saw that he had recovered. The man picked him up by the collar. John lifted the child up. He threw the boy with all his might. The protagonist flew forward. Chuck grabbed the back of his head. The sergeant looked away in surprise at the wound and wondered when he had managed to inflict it. The happy boys raised their hands and shouted that their classmate should break his nose. The protagonist ran furiously with a spear. Having dodged the attack, the man thought that he should take a closer look at his movements. He looked down in surprise. The boy ran around him from behind. John dodged the blow. Chuck swung his spear. The sergeant dodged the attack again. The man stood in front of the running boy, thinking that he was agile due to his good control of the centrifugal force of the body, so it was not for nothing that Chase praised him so much. Grinning, he decided that he also liked this guy now. The protagonist pushed off the ground. Chuck swung in a jump, thinking that he would meet his blow. The protagonist thrust a broken spear into the teacher. The sergeant was pulling a stick out of the wound. The boy was squatting in front of the enemy. The man grabbed him by the neck and asked if he should finish him off. John lifted the boy by the neck. Frowning, he demanded that his opponent surrender. The protagonist threw his head back in pain. The boy watched from the window in fear and asked if he was completely insane. The sergeant squeezed his neck with a fiery hand and screamed that he would kill him if he did not surrender. Chuck, in tears, grinned and replied that he would not surrender even if he killed him. Chase ran through the crowd of children. He called out to the sergeant in a panic. The man rushed towards him, asking if he was really going to kill him. John threw the child aside and replied that he had not surrendered, and he had not knocked him down either. Chase held the boy in his arms as the sergeant asked him how the fight ended. The man frowned and said that he was fed up with the ARC methods. John put his hand on his head. He furiously ordered everyone to be quiet. The sergeant threw his jacket over his back and said that since he couldn't give in, then he would count it as a victory. The man put his jacket on, saying that it was time to stop being nice to him, it was inappropriate. Simon looked out the window in surprise, hearing that he was able to overcome difficulties. Rick looked ahead in confusion, hearing that he had proven it. John walked away from Chase and said that when he was cured, he should be sent straight to Class B. The building was illuminated by the rays of the sun. We see the door. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked if he really meant straight to Class B. The sergeant walked with her down the hallway and said that he would put him on the list for promotion today. He looked forward seriously, saying that in truth, he believed that he was quite ready to take classes in Class A. The only thing stopping him was his meager energy potential. John looked away from the girl and said that the management did not understand anything. Introducing the monster to the robot, the sergeant said that when the time comes to fight the dragon, they do not need some magic, not energy, but the rest of the will, courage, which will help not only to hold the weapon and not be scared, but also to inflict critical damage. The man recalled how Chuck swung a spear and said that in this regard he has every chance to become the best striker they have ever trained. They cannot afford to miss such a talent simply because his energy potential is slowly developing. The girl looked at him in surprise and said that she had never heard him praise a student. It seemed to her that he irritated him. Frowning, John replied that on the contrary, he liked him. The plot takes us to the 7th day of sick leave to the door to the ward. The girl was holding a folder and asking the instructor whether he was coming in or not. Chase was standing by the door with a basket. He looked into the basket of groceries and said that he got something to eat. The nurse looked at him and told him to go through. The man threw the window and the door and said that he decided that it was better not to disturb him for now. Chuck tried to lift the ball mentally. The boy held his hands around the ball. He frowned furiously. Chase watched him with concern. The protagonist picked up the glowing ball. The girl happily gave the man a high five. The instructor put his hand to the back of his head and said that the boy had excellent concentration. He entered the child's room. Chase smiled, said hello and asked how he was feeling. The protagonist looked happily and said that he was better, thanks to him. The man leaned over the basket and said that he brought some food. The instructor looked at the table with food and said that tomorrow he would continue his studies in Class B. He was proud of his achievements in telekinesis. He did not waste time even in the hospital wing. Chuck chewed his food, saying that his energy potential was low, so he decided to improve his telekinesis while he was lying around. Chase peeled an apple with a smile and said that he was a good boy, that mastering a weapon was not everything for a superhuman, that he needed to have at least some level of telekinesis. Having imagined an explosion and a robot, he said that the fight with the enemy would be mostly in the air, and that he definitely needed the ability to catch a weapon with telekinesis if it was knocked out of his hands. The man snapped his fingers. The girl at the reception looked at him in surprise and asked what kind of exit he was leaving the hospital at this hour. There were lanterns shining near the building. The boy walked behind the instructor and asked why they had come to the gym. Chase turned around and replied that he was concerned about his extrasensory development. Judging by what he had seen, his chances of awakening the ability were very small. The man imagined a guy with fire and said that his peers already mastered fire and teleportation. Frowning, he said that he should give up hope for such achievements. The instructor's eyes lit up and Chase asked how he should fight. The boy looked at the light in shock, listening to the surprisingly simple answer. The man stood among the hovering sticks and said that he should put all his diligence into developing telekinesis, and then telekinesis could well become his superpower. Chuck looked at him seriously and thought about training telekinesis. Chase descended along the hovering sticks and said that superpowers are like muscles, the more you train them, the stronger they are. Clenching his fist, he said that dividing recruits into ranks is nothing more than a convention. His generation has immeasurably greater potential than theirs. The instructor smiled and said that he should work hard. The boy clenched his fists with a smile. He walked along the floor. The protagonist approached the door of Class B. The protagonist exhaled decisively. Suddenly, Chuck crashed into the guy. Dimitri looked down and asked who he was. The boy held his nose and listened as he called him by name. The boy patted him on the back and said with a smile that he was being modest. Everyone knew him. Dimitri extended his hand and said that it was nice to meet him. He was the class representative of Class B and introduced himself with his full name. Chuck extended his hand and asked if that was how he should call him. The boy shook his hand with a smile and replied that he could just call him Dima. He hoped for friendship and cooperation. He raised his hand and said that the boy had come just in time. Now was free time for training. It was time to go. The protagonist looked around the gym. Dimitri happily pointed his finger forward. Frowning, Chuck thought about how he loved training. The daily routine at the Arc Institution was stifling with its monotony. His abilities were low compared to others, and this was always additional stress. The protagonist took the spear and thought about how the sword of Damocles of expulsion was constantly hanging over him. The boy confidently took the stick and thought about how the only activities where he could completely let off steam were training. He quickly ran forward, deciding that he could have a blast. Dimitri looked ahead in surprise. The guy watched the running boy. Chuck was beating children in the face. The protagonist confidently swung the stick. He stood among the beaten boys and asked if they really came here to have fun. The boy sat behind him in tears. Kyle turned around in surprise, hearing that his superpower was his energy potential. Chuck looked at the beaten boys and asked if they really had fun spitting from above on those who were less capable than them. Frowning, the protagonist said that they should be grateful that martial arts competitions were not part of the mandatory training program. Dimitri stood behind him and said that it was incredible. Raising his shaking hand, the boy thought about how he was even stronger than expected, and finally there was someone he wanted to fight with all his heart. The boy remembered crying over the sword. A classmate came up to him. The bully frowned and asked why he was sitting there. Let him attack. His friend pushed him and said that it was his turn. Kyle imagined the guys standing in front of him and discussing who would be the third. He remembered the protagonist picking up a stone and mentally calling him. The child imagined the opponent picking up a sword and asking what was wrong. Chuck hit him in the face with a stick. He grinned furiously. The boy imagined the guys flying to the sides. Kyle sat on his knees in tears and wondered if he was serious. The protagonist stood confidently in front of him. The boy reached out to him. Frowning, the protagonist asked Dimitri if this was really what they called healthy competition in Group B. Kyle raised his hand in fear and called him. The boy put his hand to his forehead and said that it was called Arc. Their enemy spares no one, so there is no place for the weak here. Extending his finger, Dmitri said that he was special here, but now he was doing him a disservice. The boy frowned, hearing that this would not bring anything good in the future. Chuck clenched his fist furiously. Turning around, the boy said that even so, attacking one with 3 people was not right. The beaten guys were sitting on the floor. Dmitri raised his hand with a smile and offered to show them a real duel. The protagonist took the stick with a grin and said that he agreed. The opponent quickly raised his sword. The protagonist parried the blow. The boy looked at the enemy's sword and thought that if he blocked 2 attacks in a row, the spear could break. He dodged the attack. Chuck looked at the opponent's leg, thinking that he would first distract him and then knock him down. The boy swung the spear. The protagonist hit the opponent in the leg. Frowning, the protagonist decided that it was all over. He pulled the spear towards the guy's face. Chuck stamped his foot. Dmitri dodged the blow. The elder jumped in front of him. The guy pressed his forehead to his opponent. The boy flew to the floor. Clutching his head, the protagonist said that he was hitting the head. This is martial arts, not a street fight. Dmitri madly raised his hand and replied that he should watch not only the weapon. He started practicing sambo as soon as he learned to walk. If he gets caught, he will not collect bones. The protagonist leaned on the spear and asked if he would do it like that. Was he really going to defeat the dragon with sambo techniques too? Dmitri raised his sword and said that if necessary, he would strangle him with his bare hands. The guys joyfully raised their hands and shouted that the tiger cub from Siberia should win. Turning around, the guy replied that he had not been a tiger cub for a long time. It was stupid. The protagonist gritted his teeth and thought that they were fools, even though they insulted each other, but it was not serious. Chuck watched as the boys cheered for each other, thinking that they were attached to him, but he felt it. The boy looked sadly at Kyle. He frowned. The protagonist looked at the running enemy and listened that it was enough to look around. Chuck swung his spear. The protagonist pulled it out towards his opponent, thinking that he did not want to drag out the fight. Dmitri rushed forward in rage. The boy hit the floor with a stick. He pushed off the ground, deciding that he would end the fight right now. The opponent looked at him in surprise. The protagonist jumped. The protagonist swung his spear. The boy flew towards his opponent. The guys were taken aback. The broken spear flew up. The protagonist landed, thinking that he wanted to break his weapon from the very beginning. The stick fell to the floor. Dmitri rushed to the boy. He picked him up by the arm. Chuck looked at him in shock. The protagonist fell to the floor. The opponent looked at him and told him to give up. The guy sat on his opponent and threatened to break his arm. Gritting his teeth, Chuck told him to try to do it. He looked at the surprised enemy and asked if he was really that confident. The guys looked at them in shock. The boy closed his eyes in pain. Dmitri looked at him with displeasure. He stood over the twisted enemy and repeated that he told him to give up, only he got his hands dirty. Kyle raised his hand in tears. Turning around, the guy said that it was amazing. He wasn't crying because of a fracture. Well done. Chuck stood behind Dmitri, who was saying that he needed to be taken to the infirmary. The protagonist swung his spear. Frowning, he said that apparently all his opponents had done was shed tears because of this. The boy looked at the boy's shaking legs. The protagonist was dripping with sweat and shouting that he should get up. They weren't done. Chuck looked at the broken spear in surprise. Dmitri was unconscious on the floor. The boy woke up in a hospital bed. He sat up abruptly and wondered what was going on. The protagonist looked at the notification on his watch. The man was video messaging that everything was fine. He had exceeded all their expectations. Thanks to him, his younger brothers were fine. The boy shed tears when he heard that he would be sent a video from them next time. He watched his happy brothers on the screen. Smiling, Chuck said that they were really fine. Look how round their faces had become. The protagonist turned to the boy, saying that he was already awake. Let him turn to the next photo. Dmitri stretched out his hand in fear and asked what just happened. The guy pressed the boy's watch and asked what the hell was going on, why he was doing this at all. Grinning, he said that he had a crack in his head. He attacked him from behind, like a coward, to which the boy replied that it was his own fault. Dmitri grimaced in displeasure. Looking at his watch, Chuck said that he got angry then. The protagonist looked at his classmate and said that it was not him. The class president sat on the edge of the bed and said that he did too, frankly, but next time the victory would be his. Turning away, the protagonist replied that he shouldn't have done that to Kyle. He remembered how he stood in front of his friend and thought that he should have extended a helping hand to him and not gotten into a fight. Frowning, Dmitri said that he understood what he meant. All this was good, of course, but let him remember, when they moved on to the second year, they could die. The boy sat on the next bed and asked what he was talking about. The guys walked down the hallway. Chuck walked behind the headman and asked where they were in such a hurry, to which he replied that it was easier to show than to tell. Dmitri entered the room and said that they say here, if he breathes, we will save him. The wounded guy was being taken away on a couch. Chuck jumped back from the aisle in surprise. Taken aback, he wondered what just happened. The guy watched as the doctors took the man away and asked if he now saw how dangerous training could be. The protagonist pointed his finger forward and asked if the guys from the next level weren't their peers, because that man was clearly older. Turning to his friend, he said that the guy looked more like an instructor than a student. Dmitri silently scratched the back of his head. Imagining a syringe in his neck, he said that when they move on to the second year, they start giving them drugs. The guy looked at the shocked boy and said that he was growing rapidly, and his body was becoming like an adult's. Extending 3 fingers, Dmitri reminded them that they would have to fight a dragon already in their 3rd year. Chuck looked at his cast, listening to him say that they would not wait until they grew up naturally, and replied that this was not bad. The guy looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The protagonist imagined himself on the street and said that he always wanted to be an adult. He remembered stealing a bag from a man, thinking that he had to do many things to survive. The boy imagined fighting off men, thinking that he was constantly confronting those who were older. The protagonist remembered being hit in the face. Chuck was falling from the blow. The guys swung at him menacingly. The boy remembered lying on the ground, beaten. The strangers were leaving with the stolen bag. Frowning, he said that he didn't need a happy childhood, surviving was the most important thing. Dmitri smiled and said that he was definitely the most mature in the arc. Chuck hung his head in displeasure, saying that he understood what he was talking about. It was time to go back. Ruddy was standing outside and telling them that there would be aerial training today. Looking at the backpacks on the ground, he said that they had to do everything as they were taught. They were leaving at 4:30 in the evening. Let them check their things in advance. Dmitri put on his backpack with a smile and asked if his friend missed his hospital bed, because they had just been discharged from the hospital and were immediately in the air. The protagonist was sitting happily with a backpack. Hanging his head, he said that there was a lot of food in this bag. Frowning, he told his friend that it seemed like this would not be just air training. Dmitri turned away and said that some had already opened their rations. Shame. He looked away in surprise. The boy tapped his friend on the shoulder and asked him to look over there. The headman watched as Simon fastened his bag and told him to look at him. Dmitri smiled madly, saying that this was the same one, the last genius of England. I wish I could beat him up. The boy turned around warily. He looked at the embarrassed guys and wondered what was wrong with them. The protagonist watched the sad Kyle. Chuck looked down in alarm. Ruddy put his hands on his hips and shouted that it was enough messing around. Everyone on board quickly. The protagonist ran forward in gear. The guys were climbing into the helicopter. The sergeant stood among the students on board. The helicopters took off into the sky. Ruddy lifted his cap and said that it was time for them to go too. He turned around displeasedly and said that they were wiping the snot of these bastards for the last time. A hand was extended because once upon a time he saw him for the first time. Smiling, he helped his friend because he immediately realized that he was not like the others. Stretching out his hands, he understood that his abilities confirmed this. Chuck ran because he was unable to help him no matter how long he waited. The child cried, kneeling, because he was all alone. His parachute was tangled in a tree. An hour earlier, helicopters were flying near the water. Everyone was sitting in the helicopter and asking how long the flight would be, and the arc buildings seemed small. The clock said that they were flying over an uninhabited island. The helicopters were near the island, and their goal of the training was to survive. Looking at the sky, he said that the provisions in the backpacks should have been enough for 2 days, and then they themselves had to solve the problem of food. The boys were shocked and scared by the goal. Smiling and looking at them, he said that it was almost like a camp. Opening his mouth and holding the clock nearby, he turned to the instructors. Crying, they were told that they would return for them in a week and they must try not to die. He lowered the boy into the water. Turning around, he asked if this was the last one. Looking at the map, he answered affirmatively since no one else had given up. Holding the boy, he asked if the recruits were distributed evenly across the territory. The guy said that at first they were, but then the 7 of them united into one group. Opening his mouth, he answered that they were not as harmless as adults. Remembering the boy, he said that if they were left without control, they would immediately begin to solve everything by force, and instead of acting together for the sake of survival, they would rob each other. Smiling, he thanked him and said that this would be enough for at least a couple of days. Unpacking the backpack, he said that he was a good boy since he did not touch the supplies. Waving his hand, he said to get out since the rest was for the main thing and asked Carl to look. He was sitting on the ground. Opening his mouth, he said that they were all donkeys. Looking at him, he continued that it was said that they would look for food until the sun sets, but in the end they were doing something else. Pointing his finger at them, he asked if he had gathered them to have a joint dinner. With shining eyes, he said that this was necessary so that no one could defeat them. Clenching his fists, he began to shout that this was true. Rejoicing, he said that together they would cope with everything. Looking into the distance, he heard cries for help. Surprised, he turned towards the sound. Someone was screaming from afar. Smiling, he went towards the sounds because this was the next victim. The sun was shining, someone was standing near the water. He stepped onto the sand because he had lost a lot of time. Walking and looking, he said that he had been swimming all this time to the shore, when suddenly his face changed because the place seemed suitable to set up camp. Looking at the rocks, he understood that he needed to find shelter. Walking in the bushes, he said that he had been hungry all his childhood. Exhaling, he continued that there would be enough provisions. Closing his mouth, he understood that many in such a situation would start taking food from the weak. Simon stood, his hair fluttering in the air. Dmitri stood opposite and asked what he needed from him. Looking crazy, asked to fight. Simon was silent from the beginning. Started to leave because he did not want to waste energy. Straightening his hand, tried to explain that he misunderstood because it was purely sporting interest. Looking back, mentally called him sick. Taking hold of the straps, said that they communicate a little. Grimacing, understood that he was a bore. There was already wind, clouds were flying across the sky. Someone was walking on the grass. Looking up and exhaling, understood that that was it. Laughing, called the boy an idiot because he was dangling. He took the backpack with his hand. Looking at him, thanked. Crying, asked to stop so that they would leave at least a little. Pointing his finger, said that if he had not been dangling on the tree, he would have received from them and let him wait for the instructors. Laughing, looking at him, said that he would not die of hunger in a week. Crying, said that they were mean. It was night, he was still hanging on the tree and crying. He remembered Simon saying discontentedly that he was annoying him. Others asked him to shut up because they hated it when people cried. Smiling, Dmitri said that guys don't cry over nonsense. Opening his mouth, he began to scream and shed tears even more. He looked down, sounds were coming from him. Looking down, he sighed from hopelessness. His eyes were tired and empty, when suddenly someone was climbing through the bushes. Looking, he realized who it was. The main character ran up to him. His eyes began to close, when suddenly they completely closed. Chuck also ran up to him, when suddenly he disappeared. There was no trace of him. Sounds were heard from the bushes. Chuck was coming out of the bushes. Looking at him, he asked who it was. The guy was sitting on the ground and doing something. Kyle climbed out of the tent in surprise. He saw Chuck, who was tinkering. Looking at him and holding a knife and a spear in his hands, he asked if he was awake. Opening his mouth, he said his name. There was breakfast on the ground. Taking the food in his hands, he said that he couldn't find his bag, so he would eat his rations. His stomach was growling. He looked up and realized that there was barely enough food for one, and he hated being a burden. Having started eating, he burst into tears, thanking him for the food. Eating, tried to say that he was grateful to him. There were helicopters above the tent. One said that they needed to find helicopters. They were also watching the other guys. He looked at the screen to see how they were surviving. They came to him and said that smoking was prohibited. Smiling, he said that he was trying to seem cool, then asked if there was anyone interesting. Poking his finger, he confirmed that there was one sick in the head and let him see for himself. Holding the object on his head, he understood that it was nonsense to survive on a desert island. He made a raft and returned to the ark. The protagonist drank water from a bottle. Exhaling, he said to drink until it bursts, and then they will go. Covering himself with his hand, he said it would be better to find shelter because it was hard to walk during the day. Podia thought that they needed to get food so that both of them would have enough for the remaining time. His eyes lit up because even coconuts were not visible. Shouting his name, he took him by the shoulder. Holding him, Chuck did not understand anything. He stepped on a branch. Looking into the hole, he said that it was not very big, but you can dislocate your leg. Looking at him, he asked how he found out about it. Smiling, he asked if he saw. Sitting on the ground, he agreed. His head began to spin. Chuck realized that he was starting to delirious. Looking in surprise, he thought that apparently the power was appearing and this would be useful. Ida thought that Kyle was worried about what happened and perhaps because of this the power awakened. Looking at him, he thought that this task would help him develop his abilities. The two of them approached the tent. He opened the curtain and looked. With shining eyes, he understood that there were two of them. Looking at the dishes, they said that there were no bags and apparently they took them with them. Clenching his fist, he asked if they would beat him. The other answered that they were unlikely to have gone far. Perhaps they were looking for water. Smiling, he said that they would come later and catch them when they would be resting. Sticking out his tongue, he was happy because they had come. Closing his eyes, he said that he wanted to lie down. The other answered that if they went, they would return faster. Surprised, he asked to stop. Taking a stone in his hands, he said that someone had been there. There was a stone at the entrance that he left as a mark. The stone had been moved from its place. Looking at the tracks, he said that there were at least 2 pairs. Then he realized that there were more. Looking at Kyle, he said that the more people, the easier it is to rob people and that they needed to fold the tent and leave. Evening came. They were walking through the forest. The sun was shining brightly. Holding a stick in his hands, he said that they needed to find a place to camp before it got dark. Looking down, he said that he felt unwell and his eyes closed. Turning around, he asked if everything was okay. A red aura appeared near him. His eyes widened. He saw a red tiger. He also saw Chuck with his mouth open. Suddenly, he began to attack him. He jumped and spread his arms. He pushed Chuck away, who dropped the spear. Both fell to the ground. Suddenly, a tiger appeared. Chuck bared his teeth because he was in shock. The tiger looked at him with its yellow eyes. He understood that the spear was far from him. The monster opened its mouth and looked at him. Suddenly, it began to scream. The protagonist closed its eyes. A red flame appeared. Suddenly, the tiger was hit. Gorev ran into the bushes. It was Rick, who was casting a spell and asking if everything was okay. The protagonist looked at him in surprise. He put his hands on his knees and asked if Kyle was with him. His leg was bandaged. They began to answer him by pointing to his leg. Trembling, he replied that he had fallen into a trap of some fools and it was hard to stand. Falling, he said, "It's good that we met." Looking surprised, Kyle said about the trap. The other replied that those guys came to them. Throwing his hand out, he knew that someone would start robbing others, but he didn't even have food, so there was nothing to take. Surprised, he asked why there was no food. Hitting himself in the stomach, he replied that as soon as he fell into the trap, he immediately ate everything. He thought uncertainly that he was stupid. It was night and they had to find a place to spend the night. A guy was sitting by the fire. He was looking into the distance. There was a bandage on his head. He stood with his mouth slightly open. They held him by the shoulders and said that today at the airport during inspection, a detector went off and it seemed he was a Superman and had the ability to telepathy. He also said that this was his chance to join the Ark. They asked him what about filming movies. Coming closer, he started shouting that he would develop his gift and quit clowning because he would have fame and fortune without this circus on camera. Looking crazy, he continued that telepaths would go down in the history of the country when the war ends and he is given the opportunity to become the one who governs the entire nation. He stood near the Ark sign. His face was dissatisfied. His hand was on the ground, sweat was also dripping. He did push-ups with one hand, shaking. Looking back, they asked him if he had any strength left. Simon was eating near a tree. Presenting him with food, he said that there was no more food. Standing up, they asked him if he was going to starve for 5 days. Squeezing his hand, he said that he was an athlete. Looking surprised, they told him that in order to become a good fighter, he needed to train a lot. They answered that telepaths did not fight with their fists. He looked at him smiling. Putting his hand to his nose, he said that he missed Chuck because besides this fool, he had no one to practice his skills with. Simon pointed his finger and asked if he had fought him. He smiled again because he had finally reacted and could train with the blonde. It was sunny, the light was on in the tent. He stood up and said good morning to everyone. Sitting by the fire, he suggested sticking together. Pointing at Kyle, he said that they would go look for food and firewood. Raising his hand, they told him that it would be better for him to stay and watch the shelter because his leg hurt. Spreading his hand, he said that thanks to his pyrokinesis, they had every chance of surviving the training. Fish were swimming in the water. Looking at them, he said that they should have been good for food. Touching his face, he asked if he knew how to fish because he didn't really. Smiling, he thanked him. The guy looked at him. Waving his hand, he asked why. They answered that he had saved him yesterday and found shelter. Looking down, he said that he should have taken care of him. He remembered people who were given injections. Pointing at him, he said that on the island he saw a genius of telepathy in him. Standing near the pond, he said that he had powers capable of protecting them all, so they had to help each other. He was surprised because they called him a friend. He stood and cried. His shirt was torn because he was an orphan from Japan who did not even have a name. His skin was dark. He cried because they called him a whiner, a fool, trash. His hair was fluttering because there was a person he could trust. Opening his mouth, he said that this was much cooler than he thought. Both looked at the fish in the pond. There was a blue aura near it because Kyle saw its movements. Opening his mouth, he thought that he saw where the fish was going to swim. Looking at him, he thought that Kyle had incredible abilities from the very beginning, and if you have a little patience, then with his power they will catch fish without a fishing rod. Shouting in his own language, his eyes shone. Suddenly, the fish flew out of the pond. There were several lying on the ground because he had succeeded. They put it in a bowl because it was the 3rd day of survival training. Walking with bowls, Chuck praised them and said that they had caught 8. Looking at him, Kyle said that Simon would like it. The other replied that he was good at cooking fish. They were near a collapse, trying to hide from the light with their hands. Suddenly, he was surprised and his eyes widened. The fish fell and flew down, and he asked Kyle to wait. There was no light in the shelter and the fabric was also torn. Entering, he thought about what had happened here. Looking down, he saw his partner. Simon was lying on the floor. Someone was shouting to catch. Simon picked up a wooden sword. Holding it, he asked if he had heard that there would be survival training since he had even taken swords. Putting his hand on his head, he said that he had been thinking about learning to fight with swords in both hands, then asked why he had agreed to the duel. Looking at him, they answered that he had fought with Chuck and also the class president B taking the sword in his hands. He said that they wanted to transfer him to Class A and wanted to see if they had rushed. Smiling, he said that he liked it. They ran at each other since the fight had begun. Crouching, he pointed a knife at him. Dmitri, looking seriously, understood what would happen if he stopped. He hit the air, he had high speed. Simon hit his sword on his chest. Looking at him, they asked him if that was all. Smiling, he asked if he was thinking. Having hit him with the sword, the guy jumped back. Having run towards him, he thought that if he retreated, it would be better for him. He tried to fight back because the speed was fast. Sweat started to appear on his face because he didn't have time. They almost hit him, but he managed to move away. He looked at him with displeasure. Simon was near him while he was dumbfounded. Having crouched down from the blow, he understood that he needed to concentrate. With the sword in his hands, he began to fall. Having opened his mouth, he tried to strike. Having struck, he didn't hit him because he bent over. Simon was surprised, his eyes widened. The sword fell from his hands because it was taken away. He quickly stood up and looked at his opponent. Smiling, he shouted that it was all over. Having approached, he decided to strike. Having made his appearance, he became serious. Simon's eyes shone. Then he looked down. The sword was on Dmitri's back. Holding his head, he apologized because in hand-to-hand combat he had won, but as he had said before, they were telepaths. Then he rolled his eyes and wondered if the main character was stronger. Opening his mouth and holding Rick's head, he asked him to stand up. He was surprised because he had started talking. With scars on his face, he said that he was alive and that he was done screaming. The fabric was torn. Sitting by the fire, he asked who had beaten him like that. Opening his mouth, he initially remained silent. Then he remembered Carl because it was he and a squad of 7 people. Looking at Chuck, he said that they had taken all the food and would come again, so they should have found a more secure place. Looking seriously, he said that they would not leave. Opening his mouth, he said that he was not a weakling who would allow all sorts of freaks to mock his friends. Smiling, he sighed. Holding Rick, he said that they needed to find a new shelter and let them have a chance to temporarily settle in that place. There was a fire near them because a battle was coming and they wanted to catch them by surprise. It was night. The guys, half sitting, looked into the bushes. The light was on in the cave and there were people standing because their shelter was occupied. Smiling, he said that as soon as Kyle was ready, they would begin. The opponents were talking. Chuck said that he could not cope alone, but together they could overcome them. Closing his eyes, he thought that he was the only one who believed in him. Taking stones in his hands, he wanted not to let him down. Then he threw them at the enemies. They flew. They began to hit people. Holding a stick in his hands, he asked what it was. Looking at this, everyone shouted that it was an ambush. Holding his knees, he shouted that it was very painful. Running, they said that they were throwing stones and they needed to dodge, but Kyle saw where they were running. The stones hit them, but they did not see anything. Chuck jumped out with a spear in his hands. He began to hit everyone, baring his teeth. He hit one in the chin, which caused blood. Simon stood and held his comrade. His eyes were angry and there was blood on his shirt. They stood opposite each other and looked. Chuck seriously held a spear in his hand. The hero raised the stick up. Gritting his teeth, the guy thought that what Chuck. Frowning, he added that he wanted to say that he had single-handedly scattered 6, but that couldn't be. Putting his hand to his face, the guy said that there had to be someone else, asked who he had come with. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist told him to get out, he would deal with this idiot one-on-one. Angrily looking ahead, the guy thought that the 2 of them had defeated his guys, and Kyle had a hand in it. Chuck gritted his teeth and said that they had come to avenge Rick. He was wrong if he had decided that he would get away with everything. The guy reached for the stick and said that he was annoying. Clenching his fist, he added that this time he would get it. Stretching his hand forward, the hero said that he should attack and not talk. The guy swung his stick and shouted. Suddenly, the protagonist struck him. He turned his head to the side. The guy swung his stick and shouted. Suddenly, a counter blow flew at him. Gritting his teeth, he was breathing heavily. Looking at him, Chuck asked, "What, is it hard?" Frowning, he added that he should get ready, this is just the beginning. Turning around, the guy shouted that he shouldn't show off. The hero began striking him. He fell to the ground and shouted. The guy began to crawl forward, thinking that this can't be. "Chuck, this bastard is so strong." The protagonist clenched his teeth tightly and said that there was not a single undamaged spot on Rick. Why was it necessary to beat him so hard? The guy's body trembled and he thought that he should not look down on him. Glaring furiously, he added that he should not dare to think that he was better. The man put his hand on his shoulder. The thought appeared that he was a famous actor in Germany, a natural talent. His father had achieved great heights in politics thanks to his popularity. The man smiled broadly and said that if he were a telepath, he would conquer this country. Go ahead, anyone who stood in his way would pay for it. It was said that although his ambitions knew no bounds. Carl stood up and said that he had advanced so far in his studies. Throwing dirt forward, he added that he would not let him ruin everything. The hero lowered his head and shouted that his eyes. Suddenly, the guy hit him with his fist. Stretching his hand forward, Kyle shouted his name. He ran forward at a rapid pace. Frowning, Carl said that he should stop. He began to strike the hero. The guy clenched his teeth tightly. The protagonist fell to the ground. Kyle looked at him in surprise. Carl's eyes widened and he said he would teach them a lesson. A bright blue beam appeared. The guy looked away and said that it was him. Kyle stretched his arms out in front of him and told him not to touch Chuck. The guy gritted his teeth and asked what he wanted to beat up to. He grabbed him by the clothes and added that he didn't like him from the start, that such a useless person had forgotten in the arc. The guy lowered his head and said that he should have dealt with him earlier. Suddenly, the hero hit him with his fist. Carl fell to the ground. Clenching his fist, the protagonist asked what and what use he was, found himself some minions and hid behind their backs. The guys used their skills. It seemed that any of them were better than him. The guy looked at him in fear. He shuddered when he heard that he was in for a lot of trouble to get ahead. Chuck looked at him furiously and said that he was just a nobody. Carl's eyes widened. Suddenly the hero struck him. He froze abruptly. The guy raised his eyebrows in anticipation. It was heard that everyone has a reason to be the first. Leaving, the hero said that he should look for another way to achieve this, at least lay a finger on his friends and not get off so easily. Closing his eyes, Carl thought that he never wanted to be a telepath. Lying on the ground, he began to laugh. After a while, Carl left Ark of his own free will. The guy smiled, looking at the hero. Kyle showed his abilities. 3 days on a desert island flew by in the blink of an eye. Helicopters flew in the air and someone shouted about them. Looking up, the guy said that he would not like to repeat such an experience, to which the protagonist replied that he agreed. A crowd of students gathered together. It was heard that thanked them. Rick raised an eyebrow when he heard that they had left them food so they could survive, how he had managed to catch a fish, and why had he kept quiet about his ability, to which he replied that there was nothing to tell. Pointing at the hero, he added that he deserved special thanks. If he hadn't stopped that idiot, they would have all. The protagonist looked at the notification and read that the training was over. He had shown good results this week. Sitting by the tree, the guy said about the sergeant, and Dimitri said that he didn't think he would be happy to hear his voice. Chuck looked surprised, seeing that they should get on board the helicopter in the order they were called, to which he thought that they were being divided. The helicopters were flying forward rapidly. The guy frowned. Putting his hands on his hips, he said that the instructors had been monitoring the training the whole time, and it was unanimously decided to leave the 4 of them. Gritting his teeth, the guy said that this was not just a survival training, but a test to find the savior of humanity. The guys looked at him, hearing their names. The hero frowned, hearing that they were moving on to the 2nd year. A view of the stadium opened up. Grinning, Rick turned to the hero and asked why they hadn't had a day off for a long time. Maybe they were kicking a ball around. Lying on the bed, the protagonist asked again. Holding the ball in his hands, the guy asked what he could play, to which Chuck replied that he could. People were standing at the stadium. It was said that weekends are rare in Ark. Looking straight ahead, the guy asked that everyone was gathered, then they would begin. Looking to the side, Dimitri asked that they did not use their abilities, to which Simon replied that they did not. They were playing football. It was said that only in special cases were students allowed to rest. Today the reason was a meeting of instructors. People were sitting at the table. The thought arose that where they would discuss their transfer to the 2nd year. The guy looked straight ahead. The man was sitting in front of him. Alexander gritted his teeth and said that they will begin. Sasha looked to the side and said that this time there were 4, let them tell about them. Looking down, the man said that Simon and Dimitri could be transferred without problems. They had more than enough strength, but the remaining 2. The hero looked at the ball. It was heard that from the very beginning the level of his abilities was the lowest and remained so to this day. The guy grabbed him by the head. It was heard that only thanks to Sergeant John the boy did not remain in Class D. Frowning, Alexander asked why they should send him to the next course. The protagonist frowned furiously. The stick was stuck in the guy. It was heard that the sergeant had already spoken. Stretching his hand to the side, the man said that Chuck had not only good hand-to-hand combat skills, but also patience and willpower. All these qualities are necessary for a fighter. Putting his hand to his face, Alexander replied that he rarely praised anyone like that. Turning his head, the sergeant thought that if he did not do this, the boy would not see a transfer to the 2nd course. Chuck swung his weapon. It was heard that in addition to great potential in telekinesis, his ability to control the situation was amazing. It seems that at that moment he added telekinesis to the power of rotation. The hero played football. It was heard that the most amazing thing is that he did everything himself. The protagonist kicked the ball. It was said that no one taught him this. The ball flew into the goal. Alexander closed his eyes and said that they would move on to the next one. Rick grinned and said that he was such a sly one. He said that he couldn't do anything, but he was doing this, to which Chuck replied that he didn't know. Looking at Simon, Dimitri asked that isn't everyone in England good at football, and he replied that what does he have to do with it, a fool or something. The man slammed his hand on the table and shouted that they were making fun of him. The girl stood up and said that he was the weakest mentally. He would explain. The guy looked down. It was heard that immediately after the advancement their bodies would be modified, and the most important thing in this process was mental endurance. Sasha extended her hand forward and asked that they wanted to kill the boy. John closed his eyes. Frowning, he said that Kyle's telekinesis was top-notch and more powerful than many famous talents, and he could also see a little into the future, which was an exceptional ability. Clenching his fist, the man said that it wasn't a question of strength, but of endurance. The sergeant raised his hand and replied that that was why they should be transferred together. Chuck had a big influence on Kyle's willpower. Alexander took off his glasses, hearing that he was playing the role of an older brother, to which he asked what Chuck was again. Looking straight ahead, he added that it seemed they really wanted him to move up to the second year. Yes. The sergeants exchanged glances. The hero ran forward at a rapid pace. He kicked the ball in front of him. Rick grinned and said that it was a great pass. He led 2 students and added that they should try to take it away. The guy at the gate prepared to hit. Frowning, Rick thought he was surrounded. Suddenly he passed the ball to the protagonist. The ball flew into the goal. Chuck stretched his leg forward. People were standing near the goal. A shout about a goal was heard. Having shaken his hand, the guy said that he was a good boy, to which the hero asked that they had done a great job, and someone said that they had enough games. They looked away in surprise. The guys froze, listening to the fact that the meeting was over. The results would be announced soon. Putting his hands on his hips, the sergeant said that since everyone was here, he would tell them right away. Looking at him, the students heard that they had received approval for the transfer. The protagonist froze in surprise. Rick put his hand on his shoulder. Grinning, he asked what was wrong with him, congratulating him. Closing his eyes, the guy said that his time had come. Chuck grinned back at him. Stretching his hand forward, the hero said that apparently, yes, they would see each other. The sergeant crossed his arms and said that it was enough and that everyone should go to their rooms. The protagonist turned his head, hearing that the 4 of them should pack their things and get ready. Frowning, he thanked him. Looking straight ahead, John heard that he had been transferred from Class D, and today, he thought, it was all thanks to him. He took out a cigar and replied that he wasn't sure if it was his merit, but he should know that there was no turning back. If he finished the second year without incident, they would see each other again. Taking the cigar in his teeth, the sergeant said that he should survive. The hero put his hand to his face. The sergeant started to leave. The guys were standing outside with their things. Dimitri grinned and said that they would go. Looking at him, the protagonist asked if that was it, that they needed to get to the second medical building. The guy looked down in fear. Someone put a hand on his shoulder. Kyle turned his head and addressed, to which Chuck replied that he shouldn't worry, he was with him. He said, his eyes wide open, that he was very scared, that they would perform an operation on them to speed up the development of their bodies. Raising his hand up, Dimitri said that fear has big eyes, go ahead, to which Simon asked what he was happy about, and he added that they would become even stronger. A view of the treatment building number 2 opened up, and they heard that they should come in. Standing in front of the students, the girl said that she would be observing them for 5 weeks. She frowned and introduced herself. The hero looked at him in surprise and asked that 5 weeks. A capsule appeared, and they heard that yes, that's how long their bodies would develop. 2 of them would be in the incubator, the next 3 in rehabilitation. The guys frowned, and the thought occurred to them that they would spend 14 days in this thing. Lowering his head, the protagonist addressed them. Raising his hand up, he added that they would see each other in a couple of weeks. The students looked at him. They held out their hands and shouted that they were there. Sasha grinned and thought it was interesting, so this is what he is like, this is. The guys stood in a circle, and she thought about the hero. A week ago, looking straight ahead, the girl said to inject the nutrient solution. The guys were wearing masks. Frowning, Dimitri thought, damn, he somehow felt uneasy. The protagonist looked down and thought that he was having trouble breathing. Lowering her head, Sasha thought about claustrophobia. Every future soldier has to go through this, let them forgive her, but you just have to be patient. They will fall asleep soon, and then said that when the process of falling asleep is complete, let them begin the operation. Chuck closed his eyes, and she thought that a week had already passed. Fortunately, there were no problems, but someone can have a hard time with surgery. The students were in the capsules, and the thought arose that if this continued, would the human race be able to exist any longer? Standing behind Sasha, the girl turned and said that she must be very tired. An exit appeared, and it was heard that she should rest for now. Sasha left the medical building. Then she raised her eyebrows. Standing in front of the sergeant, the girl said that if he did not care about the children, why did he constantly come to the building? John held a cigar in his hands. Looking away, he replied that it would be very sad if such valuable personnel died because of her. The girl nervously bit her lip. Sitting on the sofa, she said that she assured him that everything was in order. The second phase of the nutrient solution was now underway. A heart appeared. It was heard that the power of the dragon's telekinesis was being created in her. In other words, a high-density liquid mixed with the dragon's heart was being introduced. John frowned, thinking that if he could make the dragon's heart resonate, it would be easier to control his telekinesis, and if he gave Chuck a little push. The girl looked at her watch in surprise. She abruptly rushed forward. Sasha opened the doors and asked what happened. The hero raised his hands, and it was heard that he was coming to. Turning around, the doctor shouted that a sudden awakening would be too painful for him. Stretching her hand forward, Sasha said that they should stop the process right now. Suddenly, the sergeant grabbed her hand. She froze in surprise. Looking away, the girl turned to him and asked what he was doing. Looking at her, John replied that the operation could not be interrupted. This guy had to go to the second year. The girl sat in front of the hero. Grinning, she asked if he was okay. The protagonist smiled widely and replied that he was, thanks to her. Frowning, the doctor said that this had never happened in her practice before. It was the first time they had seen a telepath reject the introduction of a dragon's heart. Chuck started hitting the capsule. It sounded like he was going crazy. He would die if the process wasn't stopped. Let them stop injecting the solution right now. The girl looked surprised when she heard that he wasn't the one who got here thanks to his gift of telekinesis. Holding her hands, the sergeant said that he should skip the process of mental induction and continue. He would survive in any case. Sitting at the table, the doctor said that he would be registered as a case of enhancing only physical qualities, asked if everything was okay with him, any organic rejection. Grinning, the hero replied that he felt great, there were no problems, now at least he wouldn't be expelled because of his grades. The girl adjusted her hair and thought that his psychological stability was simply amazing. Wasn't this the soldier John had promoted? Endurance and telepathy were directly dependent on each other, but why were his extrasensory abilities weak and his fortitude great? The protagonist got up from the table, hearing that it was good, he could go, and the thought occurred to him that it probably had something to do with rejection. Chuck suddenly froze in surprise. Raising his hand, Dimitri said that finally, from today they were in their second year. Simon looked away. Grinning, the hero replied that 5 weeks had flown by completely unnoticed. Pointing at the guy, he added that they had changed so much, especially. Kyle adjusted his hair, hearing his name. Putting his hands on his hips, the protagonist said that it was good that everyone was safe and sound. Turning around, Simon asked what there was to be happy about. It was kind of normal, let him not get cocky even though he was special to them. He began to leave. A view of the stadium and the dormitory opened up. It was said that there were no special differences from the first year, but from the second, training was conducted in squads. Chuck stood in front of the room and thought that each squad included 4 to 10 people. At the moment there were 12 second years in the arc. Looking away, he added that he would really have his own room. He couldn't believe it. Kyle and 7 other guys would be in the squad with him. Grinning, the guy said that he was Adam, the leader of the squad, asked what and they were Kyle and Chuck, right? Standing in front of them, he added that although there were many disciplines in the second year, they should focus primarily on 3 main ones: fire training, air combat, and imitation of battle. Closing his eyes, the guy asked what he thought. There was no point in telling about the first point, to which the hero replied that modern weapons are quite effective in fighting monsters, and they answered that yes, that's right. The creatures appeared. It was heard that among the monsters known to them, there are those with low intelligence. These are ogres, grants, werewolves, but their commander named Ella, she has a well-developed intellect. She uses telekinesis on par with the fighters. Ella raised her hands up. It was said that if she uses it, the weapon will be useless. Right, a good question. By the way, yes, firearms will not help much against telekinesis. The commander of the monsters began to collapse. It was heard that Ella cannot use it endlessly. Like a dragon, there will be little left of her when her strength runs out. Smiling broadly, Adam said that fire training is important, but air combat and imitation of battle are more important. Why? Because the squads compete with each other. A view of the island opened up. It was heard that the imitation of battle is training conducted in an artificially created arena in Ark. The guy pointed to the side. It was said that the main goal is to capture the flag, which is located at the enemy base. Everything is decided by strategy and individual skills, but this training is very dangerous. The guy struck with a sword. It was heard that even without using metal weapons, there is every chance of dying. People ran towards each other. It was said that the air battle takes place on airboards, although here it is quite easy to get around the enemy. A glow appeared around the man. It was heard that there should always be supporters in the rear. They control most of the boards and either help move them or in emergency cases strike the enemy. Stretching his hand forward, Adam said that until recently there were no strong telepaths in their squad, but now that Kyle has arrived, they have nothing to fear. The guy looked at him nervously. Grinning, he asked that he can handle it, to which Kyle hesitated. Frowning, the man asked what was too weak to answer right away. His opinion was of no interest to anyone. If the team needed his skills, he wouldn't get out of it. Grinning, the protagonist replied that of course he could handle it, but there was no need to constantly scold him. Approaching him, the man said that he would close his mouth, asked what he was yapping about. Looking away, the guy said that that was enough. Chuck was right about something. They were here for the first day and still didn't know much, but everything was ahead. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist heard that even though he was in the same class with them, everyone else clearly had more experience. Let him behave more quietly. Closing his eyes, Adam said that to be honest. Suddenly his eyes lit up. Smiling broadly, the guy said that he was only there because he needed Kyle, and the two of them were like a 2-in-1 promotion, always together. Putting his hands on his hips, he added that he had the lowest level of telekinesis, so they didn't expect much from him. In short, let him not interfere. The protagonist clenched his fist tightly. The students laughed at him. The guy looked surprised to hear that he understood. Stretching his hand forward, Chuck said that he would do his best to stay out of their sight. Extending his hand, the leader of the squad said okay. They shook hands. Frowning, Adam thought that they would see how long he would last. The hero smiled and thought that he would last as long as necessary. The door to the room opened. The hero turned on the shower. He was standing under the water. There was a sign on the grate about the firing range. People were shooting from machine guns. The protagonist was lying on the ground. The guy closed his eyes. He took a step forward. People were running straight. Chuck turned around and started shooting. Grinning, he thought that it was not bad. He was also supporting the squad morale. The guy closed his eyes. Turning around, he asked Kyle what he was messing around with. Gritting his teeth, the guy hesitated. Adam frowned and said that this was a disgrace. The hero looked at him. He was standing under the shower and thought that he was still behind everyone, so it seemed like he was far from being recognized. Steam was coming from the room. The protagonist was wiping his head with a towel. Stretching his hand forward, the squad leader said that he would be a reserve. Sitting on a chair, he added that during the simulated battle, the team should consist of a minimum number of fighters, and their squad already had enough masters of hand-to-hand combat. Grinning, the guy said that the entire second year would be watching the competition on the training ground. He could watch it too, so he shouldn't be upset. An image appeared on the screen. Chuck looked at it and thought that everything was fine, no problem. People were in the hall. He heard that today they had captured the flag. The 3rd and 4th squads were participating. The guy stretched his hand forward and said that there were newcomers in the 3rd squad. Let them be careful and watch the telekinesis. Frowning, the hero thought that if there were newcomers among them, then Simon. The guy appeared on the screen. It was heard that it was Simon. The students looked in surprise, and someone asked that he was a genius telekinetic. A screen from the battlefield appeared. It was heard that this was really bad luck. The guy gritted his teeth and asked why they had completely lost their minds. They wanted to attack head-on. Stretching his hand forward, the opponent answered that of course, they have a genius of telekinesis. A glow appeared around Simon. It was heard that they were powerless before his power, and he would easily take the flag from them. Frowning, the student shouted that he should stop making fun of him. He had enough telekinesis. Let him attack like that. Looking at his hands, he asked what the hell, where is the weapon? Simon stretched his hand forward. Weapons flew in the air. An indignant cry was heard. What the? How is that possible? The guy's eyes lit up brightly. Suddenly, a blow flew at the students. Grinning, the guy said that it was ready, forward. Simon looked at them. People began to fight among themselves. The guy held the flag in his hands. It was heard that they did not even have to strain themselves much for the sake of victory. Sitting on a chair, the leader of the squad said that the role of a telepath in such battles is extremely large. They have a similar scheme, as it seems to him, if Kyle is on their team, they will be able to win. The guy looked at him with fear. Frowning, the hero said that he did not think so. Standing next to the leader of the squad, he added that the 9th squad does not take into account the terrain and does not think about tactics, so you should rely only on the strength and skills of the fighters. Looking to the side, the protagonist said that if. Looking straight ahead, Adam asked what if. Let him continue. Gritting his teeth, he added that if he were in the place of the squad leader, this is what he wanted to say. Chuck lowered his head and thought that now everything was clear, the reason why he hated him. The guy was sitting on a chair. The hero looked away, hearing his name. The student pointed him in the direction. They started to leave the hall. It was heard that they would be honest. He was an outstanding fighter, like him. Even Adam admitted it. Gritting his teeth, the guy said that however, he had no place in the 7th squad. Everyone thought so. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist thought that, as expected, the leader kept him in check, and then asked what and why he did not fit into the team. Frowning, the guy answered that because he was not afraid to contradict Adam during training. Sometimes it seemed to him that he would act better in his place. A 2-headed snake appeared. It was heard that but the leader of the squad could only be one person. If he pressed a little more, he would get angry, and then there would be a split among them. The guy stood behind Chuck. It was said that since Adam was the leader, he could not contradict him. When there was a period of redistribution between the squads, let him transfer to another. Chuck closed his eyes and said that he probably would. Looking down, he thought that everything was clear now. The leader had to gain the trust of the squad members, and he had encroached on his authority. The hero froze, thinking about writing a transfer application. A view of the dorm opened up. Sitting in front of him, the man turned. He opened his eyes in surprise and asked if he was sure. The protagonist grinned and answered approvingly. Chase put his hand to his face and said that it was clear that since the decision was final, the review process would take some time. The instructors would need to discuss this issue at a meeting. Sitting on the bed, Chuck thought that it was good that the application was not accepted immediately, but would be discussed further. Looking straight ahead, he added that he could focus on personal training, not team training, since he was now free, and while waiting for a decision, he needed to learn about each squad and decide what to do next. The guy grinned, hearing that he should come in. Sitting down on the bed next to him, he asked what he had talked about with the deputy head of the squad, to which the hero replied that it was okay, it didn't matter, asked how the preparations for the air training were going. It was tomorrow. Kyle stretched his arms forward. It was heard that he could control 4 airboards at the same time, to which the protagonist asked that only boards. The students were flying on boards, and he replied that no, together with people on boards. Chuck grinned and asked that he was serious. He knew that his skills would grow quickly here, since that's how it was. He was one of the strongest second-year students, right? Looking away, he added that he shouldn't be afraid, he would root for him. The guy looked at him and replied that he did. The students were standing in the hall. It was heard that in the 7th squad there was someone really cool, right? It seemed to be Kyle. Looking straight ahead, the hero heard that he was interested in what he was capable of. Turning his head, he thought he could handle it. Adam turned around and said to take care of them. Kyle looked ahead nervously. People were looking at the screen. It was heard that squad number 1 against squad number 7, a type of training air battle. The protagonist frowned and thought that the goal of the battle was to learn how to work with airboards. An airboard appeared. It was said that dragons fight mainly in the air, because almost all of them can fly. At present, the main equipment along with a jetpack and a hook cable is an airboard. This is an electronic board for moving through the air. People were riding it. It was heard that in an air battle, one person can work with 2 airboards. That is, he uses one board for support and movement, and the other for damaging the enemy. A glow appeared around the man. The thought arose that there was also a support position in the team. This is the most important fighter in this training. He works only with the airboards of other team members and takes control of as many pieces as his strength allows. The support makes life much easier for his partners. Being in the rear and controlling equipment with telekinesis, this allows the rest of the fighters to concentrate on the battle. Looking at the screen, Chuck thought that the position is ideal for Kyle. He is able to control 4 airboards at the same time, however. Grinning, Adam said that they are moving forward. If they stick to the plan, they will win. Stretching out his hand, he shouted that forward. The guys rushed forward, hearing the command. Looking straight ahead, the student thought that they would carefully move forward, as Adam said. The guys looked at each other and smiled. Suddenly they flew apart. The thought appeared that and then they would go in different directions. The student looked in surprise. The guy swung his weapon at him. Suddenly he struck. Adam hit with his fist. Flying down, the guy asked what the hell. Grinning, the squad leader said that it was great, everything was according to plan. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist heard shouts about what? They had just started, and 2 were already out. The 7th squad was so strong, it was as if they knew in advance where the enemy was moving. Sitting on a chair, the guy said that in this battle, Kyle got the main role. The 1st squad did not have a strong support. Each fighter would control his own airboard, but he could take control of 4 boards at once. Then he definitely takes him and his deputy. Kyle's eyes widened when he heard that he should use his ability to see the future to find out about the enemy's movements, to which he replied that yes, I understand. Looking to the side, the guy asked that they were both good at close combat. Focus on it. Throw those guys from the first like kittens, to which he replied that yes, exactly. Looking up, the protagonist thought that his plan had every chance of success, at least in theory. They grinned. It was heard that great, then go. Kyle raised his hands up, thinking that he cannot afford a single mistake. If he screws up, the team will lose, and it will be his fault. He opened his eyes wide. A picture of the future appeared. The guy swung his sword and shouted. Looking straight ahead, he asked what the hell, these guys were always so strong, only 2 of them remained. The squad stood in front of each other. Kyle stretched his hands forward. A thought appeared, what if they do not deal with the support? Raising his hand up, the student said that they are acting according to plan. The guy nodded his head in response. Rushing forward, the student shouted. Adam closed his eyes and shouted forward, then thought that they would just go head on. The opponents were running forward at a rapid pace. The guy abruptly jumped over the squad. Turning around, Adam shouted that he should get caught first. The guy's eyes lit up brightly. Looking at him, the student asked where he was going. Turning around, Adam shouted that he should leave him and come here, that Psycho wanted to throw them off. The guy clenched his teeth tightly. Frowning, the protagonist thought that no, he had to protect the support if Kyle was cut off from the rest of the team. Looking at the chapter, Kyle heard that he should remember that the 4th and 8th airboards should always be near him. The guy swung his sword sharply. Eyes wide open, the student thought that 4 and 8. The airboards suddenly flew up. They rushed towards the guy. The student lowered his head down. The squad looked at him. The guy fell down. The student closed his eyes. The thought of what was behind him appeared. The guy was holding a sword in his hands. He smiled widely. Suddenly, the squad began to fall down. The thought appeared that the support had passed out. Looking at the screen, the protagonist heard what was happening. Now it was already a one-on-one battle. It seemed that Kyle controlled 2 airboards. Even this was cool. But he was completely exhausted. Raising his head, he thought that he knew that this was how it would end. Adam relied entirely on Kyle's telekinesis, and the whole plan was built around him. The guy stretched his arms forward. A glow appeared behind the student. He turned around in surprise. 2 airboards behind him were burning. Kyle clenched his teeth in fear. Raising his sword, the guy said that it was a pity. The student was breathing heavily. The thought appeared that it seemed that Kyle was under tremendous pressure, and in the end he made a mistake. Chuck frowned, hearing that the first squad had won. Looking straight ahead, he thought that Adam would have accepted him into the team, and Kyle would not have been left alone if only he were the squad leader. 3 weeks passed. Standing in front of the man, the hero heard that there was a conversation about his request. Gritting his teeth, Chase said that they had reviewed and approved his application for the position of the head of the new squad. The protagonist opened his eyes in surprise. He frowned and thought that they had agreed. Pulling out a piece of paper forward, the man said that in the first year he had shown himself to be a real commander, and the instructors unanimously decided to give him a chance. This would be a test of his reputation and charisma. Looking at the paper, Chuck thought that the conditions for creating a new squad, the squad must have at least 4 people, including the leader. From other squads, it is allowed to take 1 person from each. The chosen one has the right to refuse to join the new squad. Looking to the side, the main character thought that if he followed these points, he would become an enemy for the heads of all the squads. As soon as he started to act, he had to prepare well so as not to miss the most talented guys. He grinned and said that if he says he can do it, then he will. As he leaves the door, the protagonist hears that he is a quick learner waiting for results. He closes his eyes and thinks that his team, the first ones that come to mind are these 2. The guys grinned, looking away. Bending over, Chuck thought that it would be great, of course, but Rick is not here. He will talk to Kyle first. He froze, looking down. Suddenly, the hero abruptly stood up and thought that there was another one. He knocked on the door. Dimitri opened the room for him. Smiling, he asked what happened. Adam clutched his head and said that damn it. Gritting his teeth, he said that because of Kyle they always lose, to which the guy replied that he told them that they need to take Simon. The squad leader lowered his head and replied that yes, this guy showed himself in all his glory. Single-handedly dealt with several opponents. His hand-to-hand combat and telekinesis skills are impeccable. Looking away, the protagonist heard that Kyle is useless in the same conditions. His abilities are complete crap. Standing around the corner, Chuck listened to the fact that if they don't find a replacement, they will have to constantly put him as a support. Grinning, Dimitri asked what his squad is. He says he is going to call someone else. Stretching his hand forward, the hero answered that Kyle, he wants to work with him from the very beginning. To which the guy replied that it seems to him that no commander would agree to give up his fighter. Looking at him, the protagonist said that he never responded to his offer. Gritting his teeth, Dimitri said that thank you, of course, but his departure would be a betrayal. Holding a towel in his hands, he added that after all, he is the leader of the 5th squad. He cannot abandon his guys. Chuck's eyes widened. He lowered his head and said that's it. Dimitri looked at him attentively. He turned his head and said that since they were talking. The hero looked surprised when he heard that it would be better for them if they remained rivals and did not play boss and subordinate. The guy smiled widely. The protagonist grinned, looking at him. Clenching his fist, he said that he should just not cry when they met on the battlefield, to which Dimitri replied that he should get ready. This time he would break both of his arms. Chuck walked straight. He heard that it was him. He decided to lead his own squad. Looking ahead, he heard that the authorities wanted, to which he thought that they should speak louder and not whisper. The hero frowned, thinking that the news that he was gathering a squad quickly spread among the second years, and it was not surprising that the heads began to watch him, especially. Looking straight ahead, the guy said he didn't expect him to stab him in the back. Standing in front of him, Adam said that he should create a squad, or better yet, let him leave altogether. They wouldn't give him Kyle. The guy looked away. Looking straight ahead, the hero said that under his command he wouldn't be able to reveal his talent. Pointing back, Adam asked what he thought. He was the smartest. Over time he would become one of the best fighters in the squad. Frowning, the protagonist asked what he was going to ask the enemy to wait until the war began, said that he knew that with him Kyle would develop much faster. The guy clenched his teeth angrily. Hearing that the task of the squad leader was to win with limited forces, nothing would change if he blamed someone else for the defeat. Grabbing him by the clothes, he shouted that he should shut up. He wouldn't get Kyle. Looking at him, Chuck replied that it was not up to him to decide. He had to make a choice himself. Turning around, the guy addressed Kyle. Frowning, he said that if he left, he would kill him. Kyle looked at him in fear. The hero grinned and asked, what really? All he could do was chatter. Even if he was drowning, he would still continue to chat. Suddenly Adam struck him. The protagonist began to fall to the floor. Looking at him, the guy thought, damn it. Sitting on the floor, Chuck said that he knew he didn't even want to dirty his hands on him. He looked forward angrily. Standing behind Kyle, the hero said that he would wait. He began to leave. It was heard that he was completely crazy. Who would leave the team for another, non-existent one? If he didn't gather a squad, he would pay dearly for it. Kyle looked at him in fear. Walking forward, the protagonist thought that, well, he talked to everyone he wanted to. With his eyes wide open, he added what to do now if it goes on like this. Suddenly Chuck bumped into a man and said that he should forgive him. Thought about it. Looking to the side, he thought that this was fast. Turning around, the hero thought that it was possible to dress like this here. Suddenly, a notification came to his watch. He looked at it and thought that the heads of all the squads were ordered to gather in front of the medical building number 2. The students lined up in front of each other. Stretching her hand forward, Sasha said that these 6 newcomers should be distributed among the squads. Looking to the side, she added that this time the new head would be the first to choose. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist heard that forward, to which he thought that this was his chance, he should get at least one newcomer. Clenching his fists, he said that his name was Chuck, the head of the 13th squad, and he was short of people, he would be glad to have any of them. Smiling, Adam replied that of course there was no one else on the team except him. Raising his hand, the guy said that he wanted to join. Chuck smiled widely. Rick looked at him, his name was heard. A view of the dorm opened up, it was heard that it was sad, of course. Sitting on a chair, the guy said that it would be great if another person came to their squad, to which the hero replied that some of the newcomers still had not decided. Grinning, he added that thank you for trusting him and joining, he always wanted to be on the team with him. Looking at him, Rick replied that those who refused to join him were idiots, they just did not know what he was capable of, otherwise they would have already been standing in line. Stretching, he added that well, from tomorrow they begin to work hard, it was time for him to go to his room. Suddenly they looked away. Opening the door, the protagonist exclaimed in surprise. The guy chuckled when he heard the question of what happened. Adam looked at him furiously. It was heard that he had spoken about the consequences if he decided to leave. He thought he could just leave them. Smiling widely, Chuck said that fucking awesome, asked if he was definitely the Kyle he knew. Kyle closed his eyes and replied that he wasn't sure. The guy lowered his head and said that the team from the desert island was back together, now they could handle everything, right? Taking a step forward, the guy said that they seemed to be having fun here, asked if they could join. They looked at him in surprise when they heard that everyone was calling him a traitor. He knew about it. It seemed like the 13th squad would be the most interesting. Rick chuckled and asked that they knew each other. In his first year he was in Class B, to which the hero replied that of course, their squad simply needed such a talent. Lucas waved his hands when he heard his name. Smiling broadly, he greeted them and asked if it was possible to get to them in the same way. Lowering his head, the protagonist replied that yes, but they were not on good terms with the other squads, and if something went wrong, they could be disbanded. Everyone knew what would happen after that. Raising his finger, the guy replied that yes, everything was fine, and Kyle said that he supported him. Closing his eyes, Chuck thought that this was a big responsibility. Grinning, he added that he was sure that they could handle it, and then said that great, then, the 13th squad, they would see him tomorrow. Standing in front of them, the instructor said that he was glad to see them. Raising his hand, the man said that he was the senior instructor of the second year, his name was Sean. The hero frowned, hearing that he was addressed. Holding his hands behind his back, the guys heard their names. Stretching his hand forward, the instructor asked what happened to Kyle, what happened to his face. Gritting his teeth, the guy replied that he fell down the stairs. The man looked at him in surprise. Sean sighed and said that he should be careful. Raising his hand, he said that they were given extra time, since the squad was formed later than the others, so from today they begin the preparatory period, they have 3 weeks at their disposal. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist heard that after that they will participate in the competition on an equal basis with the others, so they should prepare well. The competition itself and opponents will be chosen randomly. Holding the weapon in his hands, he thought that Sean underestimated them. The guys smiled widely. The thought arose that the competition is the path of survival. The enemy is the 9th squad. The 9th squad consists of strong shooters and has the largest number of victories in the path of survival. Taking off his helmet, Lucas said that he does not like it. It is not his thing at all. If he does not hit, he can just go to the bench. Having hit him, the hero asked that he wants to die. Frowning, he said that he shouldn't even think about giving up under any circumstances, to which the guy responded approvingly. Looking to the side, the protagonist thought that he would not allow any of his guys to die, and then said that they were working on a plan for a mobile bunker. He came up with the name a second ago, so don't laugh. The guys looked surprised and asked again. 2 squads stood in the middle of the forest. He heard that squad number 10 and squad number 13, the path of survival. Holding a weapon in his hands, the guy said that they would finish this as soon as possible. Gritting his teeth, Chuck said that victory would be theirs. A command was heard to begin. The students raised their hands up. A cry was heard that this could not be missed. Forward, squad number 9, let them kill the traitors. Grinning, Dimitri said that yes, popularity. Looking straight ahead, Simon thought that there were no winners in this fight. Let's see what he does. The man took a step forward. Standing behind a tree, the guy said that he didn't see anyone. He thought they were at the starting position, to which he was told that there were no other options. Gritting his teeth, Lucas heard that they were going in that direction, to which he thought, damn, these guys are faster than he thought. He looked at his watch and heard that he saw the enemy 200 meters left. The people were standing in the middle of the forest. The hero, sitting on the ground, said, wow, they're already coming here. Rick grinned and replied that they didn't even give him a break, that damn 9th squad. The tree fell to the ground. It was heard that at least they had time to prepare, but there still wouldn't be enough time to regroup. Looking to the side, the protagonist said that if he were Lucas, he would have already gotten the hang of the situation, maybe instead of catching up with them. A bright glow appeared. Suddenly, a blow flew at the guy's leg. He closed his eyes and screamed loudly. Rushing forward, the opponent shouted that here, and Lucas said how painful it was. He gritted his teeth and turned around. Turning around, the guy thought that he would shoot at least one. Peeking out from behind a tree, the guy asked, so who would take him down? Lucas fell to the ground. Suddenly, he opened his eyes in surprise. Shots began to fly at him. Sitting behind a tree, he thought that if everything went according to plan, he would join the squad. The leg injury was just a minor hindrance. He needed to buy time. Peeking out from behind a tree, the guy asked why he was alone, and the other asked that since there were only 4 of them, it made sense to send a scout. In any case, this battle would end in a shootout. The guy frowned and said that let them cover him, he would go. The students stood in the middle of the forest. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist said that they were moving out. It was time to start. Lucas helped them buy enough time. Standing in front of the guys, he added that he might be wounded. He thought the 9th squad had decided not to unite and act, but to wait. Rick grinned and said that thanks to him they had managed to gain strength. The group was stronger than ever. And this was right before the battle, and Kyle said that they had also cut down a tree using fire and telekinesis. They attacked the tree. Frowning, the protagonist said that it was time to show what they were capable of. They stood behind the tree. It was heard that they were going into battle. What they were doing? They had cut down the tree. They were using it as cover. Looking at the screen, the guys said that this was for Kyle. Simon and Dimitri exchanged glances. Sitting behind the tree, the guy shouted that they should get it. He pulled the trigger. Lucas gritted his teeth and said that he needed to reload. Pointing a gun at him, the guy asked if he was really alone, said that he thought they were luring them into a trap, and they were just improvising on the fly. Putting a hand to his face, Dimitri said that one of the 13 was out. Well, he lasted a long time. Now they only have this wooden shield. Will they be able to win? Looking straight at him, Simon replied that there is a weakness in their tactics, but he thinks Chuck knows about it. People started shooting. He heard that the hell, what is it? It is approaching. It can't stop. The guy clenched his teeth and thought that in the 9th squad they all shoot well, but among them there are no people with such a strong telekinesis to answer. The hero looked straight. A thought appeared. What if he understands? The opponent hid behind a tree and shouted that hell, everyone to cover. Frowning, the guy shouted that they should stall for time. They will soon run out of steam. Looking to the side, the protagonist thought that it was true. He knew about their weaknesses, but the wooden shield would help to buy time again. The guy stretched his hands forward. The thought appeared that in order for Rick to use his power, gray smoke appeared around. Surprised, opening his eyes, the guy asked what the flame was, and the other shouted that it was smoke. He couldn't breathe. The students watched the battle. It was heard that he was controlling the fire. The 9th squad was suffocating from the smoke, and so what? It was possible. Grinning, Rick said that there was enough smoke. He didn't think that they could see anything, to which Chuck replied that it was great. Let him take care of those who managed to get out. The guys began to cough from the smoke. Suddenly a shot flew at one of them. It was heard that he would get it. Standing back to back, the guy said that 2 of them were out, to which he was told not to worry, the enemy couldn't see anything anyway. Shots started flying through the smoke. The guys were hit. It was heard that the hell, what is this? Looking straight ahead, the guys said that they could see everything. The protagonist started shooting. The students raised their hands up. It was heard that the 9th squad was eliminated. The 13th squad won. What was that? Kyle used the stones as a radar to navigate in space. And this devil Chuck? Just a great shooter. Smiling widely, Dimitri said that they won. Simon gritted his teeth and said that these bastards. The guys were happy about the victory. The protagonist raised his finger up. The man put his hand to his face. Looking straight ahead, he wondered what Chuck, then. People clinked glasses. It was heard that they would drink. The entrance to the room appeared. It was said that a special dinner for the winners. Sitting on the bed, Lucas said that it was worth it, to which Rick replied that it was, considering that he had been shot, and he added that he would not understand until he tried it himself. Appetizing food appeared, and it was heard that so, and now they would like to hear a few words. Looking to the side, the guy said that it was from the squad leader Chuck, who led them to victory, and the hero hesitated. He lowered his head and said that he thanked them. He knew that his tactics were very aggressive, and he also knew that they were able to win because they acted together. The guy smiled broadly. Kyle raised his eyebrows. Rick looked away. Clenching his fist, the guy said that his plan was not aggressive, but incredibly cool, to which the hero grinned. Lowering his head, the protagonist said that they were lucky since they had such physical strength. Their tactics were obvious. It was clear who would take what position in the ninth squad. Raising his hand up, Lucas said that this is what amazes him, the way he reads his opponents. He definitely made the right choice. Then he bent over and wheezed, and Rick asked if he could lie down and rest already. Smiling, the guy replied that everything was great. He wouldn't miss such a feast even if he was dying. The light was on in the room. The man was sitting at the table. Extending his hand, he said that just think, they defeated the ninth squad, one of the strongest. He must crush them before Chuck and the others thought too much of themselves. Looking at the screen, the man asked who would be best for this purpose and then thought about the seventh squad. Putting his hand to his face, Sean thought that they would definitely do everything to destroy the 13th and if the 7th squad lost. Looking down, he said that no, he would do everything to prevent this from happening. Lying on the bed, Chuck thought that he could not sleep. Sitting up, he added that before, his insomnia was due to the fear of being expelled from the Ark, but now he had the best partners, so he had nothing to be afraid of. The hero frowned and thought that no matter who their opponent was, they would still win. The squads were standing in the middle of the forest. Looking straight ahead, the guy asked that everyone remembered the plan. The guys used their abilities. It was heard that they were watching Rick and Kyle among the second years. Their abilities were some of the strongest. Putting a hand on the shoulder of an ally, the leader of the squad said that they would deal with them. Their telekinesis may be strong, but a good thrashing will make them forget about it, to which he replied that it was good. Grinning, he said that he did not know what the other fighters had in terms of abilities, but there should be no problems with them. The guy frowned. It was heard that their captain was the most powerful. Dimitri crossed his arms and asked how much they must hate the instructors now, said that right after the firearms training against the 9th squad they had to go to the captain's battle with the 1st squad. The captain tied a bandage. It was heard that in the battle it was necessary to defeat the captain of the team, a fighter with a bandage on his head, but even 2 or 3 people from the 1st squad would hardly be able to lay this monster down. The guys rushed forward. The thought appeared that this was the big guy who was chosen for the role of captain. So now the squad would be able to hold off long-range attacks and destroy the enemy. The tactics of the 1st squad are called a charging tank. Dimitri smiled broadly and asked what Chuck would do, to which Simon replied that he might shut up. The guy's eyes widened and he asked why. The guys looked at him, and the thought occurred to him that the bandage was on Kyle's head. Looking away, the captain asked what they should do, saying that he didn't see Chuck anywhere either. The guy looked at him in fear, hearing that he shouldn't be afraid, to which he responded approvingly. Throwing his weapon over his shoulder, Lucas said that he shouldn't worry, that they would protect him at any cost, and Rick said that he and Lucas would do everything. Looking straight ahead, the guy said that they had to act. Even if one team member hid somewhere, they still couldn't defeat them. They rushed forward, hearing the command. The hero looked down. Standing on a tree branch, he thought that in a battle of captains it was not at all necessary to destroy the entire team. The guys frowned, and he added that it was enough to defeat the captain with the bandage. The guy stretched his hand forward. Lucas glared at him. Rick swung his hand, to which he was told that it would not work. The guy's eyes lit up. He deftly dodged the blow. Holding back the blow, Lucas wheezed. Chuck watched the battle. Frowning, he thought, great, they are almost there. Is Kyle ready? The guy looked up. The hero began to fly down, thinking that he should not worry. They were well prepared. The captain looked at him with fear. He raised his hands in front of them. The guys looked at him in surprise. They grabbed his back. The guy grinned and said that great, now let him hold them tighter. The protagonist flew forward rapidly. It was heard that Kyle was theirs. He was approaching the battle. The opponents swung their weapons. It was heard that they almost won. Kyle raised his hands up. The squad leader looked at him in surprise and thought that where was he looking, that something was wrong. Suddenly, someone landed behind him. The guys turned around in fear. Gray smoke appeared behind them. He said, wide-eyed, that it was a trap. The captain was lying on the ground. The guys looked at him in surprise. The hero was on one knee. He stretched his hand forward and said that he thought this was the end, that they had won. The students looked at him in surprise and it was heard that the battle was over, that squad number 13 had won. The students were talking enthusiastically about how he really jumped from the top of that tree. There were at least 5 floors there. He understood that he needed to devote himself more to training. But after that, people raised their hands and it was heard that Chuck was just crazy, but he was damn cool. Crossing his arms, Dimitri said that a couple of seconds ago these guys were calling him names. He understood that showing such a result every time was expensive. The protagonist raised the bandage up, and someone shouted that this was the leader of the squad. Just a plague, what's his name? Before this he was in the 7th, but left. The man's hand trembled. It was heard that he had not participated in competitions before. Why the leader of the 7th squad did not use such a cool fighter? Adam gritted his teeth, hearing that he clearly did not understand what this Chuck was capable of. The day before the battle with the 1st squad, the hero was flying down. Kyle stretched his hands forward. The protagonist opened his eyes in surprise. Grinning, he said that he did not think that in a real fight they would have any problems now. He was amazing. A high ladder appeared. It was heard that he was much better. By the way, he was not afraid. If they screwed up now, then he would get off with only a broken nose, but tomorrow he would have to risk his life. Raising his finger up, Chuck said that controlling a person with telekinesis is very difficult. If it were easy, all the fighters would already be flying, to which the guy replied that it was interesting. The hero was standing on a tree branch. It was heard that he was hiding in a secluded place and would wait for the moment to jump, make sure that neither he nor the other team would suffer during his fall, and then thought that he should take care of him. Kyle lowered his head and shouted that he should forgive him. It was his fault that he broke his arm. Sitting on the floor, the protagonist said that everything was fine. He should not worry so much. No one died. The mission was difficult, but he did great. Pointing to the side, Lucas said that he should not blame himself. Without him they would hardly have been able to win. He did not find it. Grinning, Rick said that okay, until Chuck's arm heals, they do not have any team training, right? Suddenly a notification came to his watch. They looked at each other in surprise, and a question was heard. What is this? A new training session. An air battle in 2 days between squad number 7 and squad number 13. The guy ran forward quickly. He clenched his fists tightly. The door opened up. The man looked away. He grinned and said that it was just like that. I didn't think he would come. Adam clenched his teeth tightly. He frowned. Rick extended his finger forward and said that this was some kind of mistake. Their fighter broke his arm, and they immediately scheduled a new battle. Yes, this is an automatic loss, to which Lucas replied that the battle with squad number 7 is also coming. I'm sure they will be delighted. Frowning, he added that this is unfair. We need to go and explain everything to the leadership. Do they even realize what they are doing? Extending his hand forward, the man said that for his squad this is a chance to win. He is not confident enough in his abilities. Lowering his head, the guy said that even if Chuck had not broken his arm, they would have won anyway. The man smirked and replied that he would do everything to win. As Adam walked out of the office, he thought, damn, he hadn't listened to him at all. He looked ahead in surprise. The guy was walking down the hallway. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist said that he would stop whining. It wouldn't change anything. All they had to do was win. Standing in front of the squad, he added that, frankly, he didn't have a strategy or even a rough plan, but he promised that he would figure out how to win. Walking forward, the guy said, that's amazing. Frowning, he said that he hoped this wasn't just a bunch of small talk, asked if he was sure he could handle a broken arm. Looking away, Chuck replied that it was a bit of an inconvenience, but he thought he could kick their squad's ass with just one arm. Adam gritted his teeth and said that it wasn't that easy to kick ass in a dogfight. That thought had never crossed his mind, but he replied that he would prepare something special for them. They would be embarrassed if they didn't give it their all. Pointing forward, the squad leader said that he would kill him and Kyle. Adam glared at him. The hero's eyes widened and he said that he had never killed anyone in his life, so he shouldn't throw around such words. As he left, the guy said that he should just wait and see for himself. Rick looked at him and said that he was a pathetic idiot. The protagonist lowered his head and said that it would definitely be difficult with them. They were going to the gym. A view of the building opened up. A glow appeared around Chuck. He lowered the airboard down. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist thought that this was a failure. Even with a healthy arm, he could only control 2 airboards at most, and now he could barely handle one. He looked to the side. Rick stretched his arms forward. A thought appeared that this was not an easy task for him either, to control 2 airboards in flames at the same time. Kyle raised his hands up. It was said that they could only count on Kyle. The 7th squad did the same, but he did not want to overload them. The rival squad appeared. A thought appeared that even without strong support, the 7th squad was well balanced in terms of physical strength and telekinesis. With Adam as a leader, their teamwork made the team much stronger. Frowning, the hero thought that they could not win by attacking head-on, and someone addressed him. Taking a step forward, Rick said that they had a problem. Flames appeared around his hand. Releasing the flame, he said that there was nothing in the air that could be set on fire, so his fire was of little use. People were flying on airboards. It was heard that, and given the speed of movement, it would be very difficult to aim. The protagonist looked away. Holding onto the railing, the guy asked why they were talking so much with such a level of training. Grinning, he added that he did not think they should worry, to which Adam replied that of course not. Chuck frowned and thought that there was simply no way to win. The guy smiled and thought that there was simply no reason to lose. A crowd of students appeared. It was heard that wait, what? The 13th squad has another battle? Chuck's arm is broken. He does not think that they even participated in such training. The day of the battle came. Dimitri put his hand to his face and said that damn, everything here hints at the fact that they will lose. Instructor Sean is just a freak. Simon's eyes widened. The guy was standing behind him. Turning around, he asked what he was doing, to which Dimitri replied that someone had complained that he was standing nearby all the time, and he added that it was disgusting. Let him go somewhere far away. Closing his eyes, the guy said that Sean was trying to give each team a chance to win, 50-50 somewhere. The type of training and the teams participating in it were determined by analyzing the information. Looking straight ahead, he thought that this time it would be tough. The squad stood ready for battle. The protagonist squad stood in front of them. Gritting his teeth, Adam said that they would tear them to shreds, show everyone what happens to traitors. Grinning, the hero asked Rick how he was, to which he replied that it couldn't be better, he was ready to burn, so he shouldn't worry about him. Looking to the side, Chuck said that he should take care of them. Today he was the basis of their strategy. The squad stood in front of each other. It was heard that the battle had begun. A command was heard to launch the airboards. They flew up. The students were standing in the hall. It was heard that it was fucking awesome. Let him look at how many boards they had. They were completely crazy. The guy looked surprised and said 6. The boards flew up above the squad. It was heard that 16. Adam lowered his head and thought about the impossibility. Sophomore fighters on average control 2 airboards, supports 4, some can't even hold these 2. And they have 16. Even if each of them holds 2 boards, there are still 10 left. Kyle can't control 10. And the guy said that he asks not to be silent. Grinning, the main character said that he was definitely confused. Let him explain something. 4 guys were standing nearby and someone asked in shock that there were 16. The guy squeezed the gun and asked if it was even possible. He was told not to be afraid ahead of time. The man frowned and said to stick to the plan. They would destroy them one by one. Lucas swung the gun at them. Chuck's eyes lit up and he thought that they did not take breaks for rest during training. He extended his hand forward and continued to think that although his telekinetic abilities were below average, he had learned to concentrate his powers in the desired point of the body. The hero gripped the weapon tightly in his hands and thought that if he could develop this skill better than just controlling objects with telekinesis, he would be able to control them much faster. The protagonist abruptly threw the airboard forward. A bright flash blinded everyone around and a thought arose that this was madness. The man opened his mouth and thought that they would use airboards like this too quickly. The board was surrounded by magic and the guy thought that until it reached the target, he could react. A fiery figure appeared in the air. The guy extended his hand forward. A thought arose that since there were not many flammable things during an air battle, his fire abilities would not be of much use. Rick's eyes burned with a bright fire. The guy turned around and heard that during an air battle, some things could still be set on fire. A spark exploded near the opponents. Suddenly, an explosion thundered. The guys opened their mouths in shock. People were talking among themselves. What was that? They blew up an airboard. How much did one of those cost? Obviously more than the instructor's salary. What difference did it make? Let them blow them all up. The guys were screaming with delight. The protagonist grabbed the airboard. Rick had flames shining in his hands. Chuck made another hit. The guy hit with fiery energy. A huge explosion blinded the space. People flew back screaming from the impact. The man frowned and shouted to block, otherwise they would blow up all their airboards. He was told that if they got closer, they might get hit too. Someone's footsteps were heard. Sean ran up to the guys and shouted for them to stop immediately. He approached the man and they shouted the protagonist's name in unison. Sean crossed his arms and looked up. The hero looked at him confidently and thought that he had called him just to stare for 10 minutes. It would have been easier with the sergeant. He would have just cursed and let him go. The man grabbed his head and said that he knew it was awkward to start all this like this. Chuck pursed his lips. The guy pointed at him with his fingers and said that he had no idea how much one airboard cost. The hero widened his eyes and answered that he knew it was a lot. Sean frowned and said that if he hadn't been a member of the ARC, he would have been in debt for the rest of his life. Chuck drew his eyebrows together and answered, wasn't it his strategy he wanted to discuss? Sean closed one eye. Then he rubbed his head and said that technically, he hadn't broken the rules, but didn't he understand that it would cause a lot of controversy? Some instructors might even praise him for such a way out of the situation. Looking at the protagonist, he continued to say that however, it was not him. Next time he should warn in advance if he was planning something like that. Chuck replied that he understood. He approached Sean and asked if he could ask a question. He replied that yes, let him speak. The protagonist frowned furiously and said that if they were fighting dragons, no one would have any questions and they would not ask him about the cost of airboards. They must win at any cost. Sean's eyes widened when he heard, isn't that the purpose of their training? The man stood up, laughed and said that he caught him. He looks a lot like someone he knew. He leaned his hands on the table and said that Chuck was right about it with joy. We'll watch him on the battlefield. The hero put his hand to his forehead. When he heard that and now he can go, a man stood in front of the hero. He frowned angrily. He suddenly rushed forward and shouted the hero's name. The airboard darted forward. The man gritted his teeth with tension. A loud explosion thundered above him. The protagonist looked up. They started fighting and the thought occurred to him that this bastard wanted to throw him off. The protagonist threw the guy off. The guy pointed at him and said that even though he won the battle thanks to his worthless strategy, no one would praise him for it. Chuck looked at him and said that they would still see. He was standing at the door all this time to tell him this. The man gritted his teeth and said that he was just passing by. Who would wait for an idiot like him? Chuck passed by while the guy was shouting that he would finish him off at any cost, that he should not dare lose to anyone before that. The protagonist said okay. The sun was setting below the horizon. Lucas raised his hand up and said that he wished the leader health. Chuck waved to the guys. There were dishes on the table. Kyle said that they won. Rick said that he was afraid that they would be disqualified for breaking the rules. Lucas added that they did not break anything, but it was still a little scary. Rick looked at his watch. Kyle's eyes widened and asked what it was. He replied that yes, like that, every time, during their celebrations. Then he smirked and continued to say that this. Notifications came to their watches and Rick said that he knew what it was. The protagonist's mouth fell open. The guy looked at his watch in bewilderment. Lucas frowned angrily. Kyle's eyes widened. The man was holding a barbell in his hands. The scoreboard showed the battle schedule. His muscles tensed. It was heard that after one battle, they would immediately put another one, and with the strongest opponent in this format. The veins on the guy's face bulged. The hero smiled and said that it was very much in Sean's style, one after another. A man was walking down the street and heard that it was a good training session. The guy smiled and said that it was so hot, he needed a shower, and quickly, someone passed him. The guy's hair framed his face. They passed each other and the guy told him to wait. Suddenly he turned around and exclaimed that he was the leader of the squad, or rather the former leader of the squad. He grabbed him by the shoulder and asked if he was going to ignore him since he had moved on to the third year. The man turned around. Dimitri was saying that everything was great with their squad and that he was the leader now. Suddenly his eyes widened. The guy's eyes lit up and he told him to back off before he killed him. Dimitri asked fearfully what was wrong with him, what had happened. A smile suddenly appeared on his face. He raised his hand up and said, "Stop, that's not right, let him tell him all the details after their battle." He stood with his mouth open and held a stick in his hands. A man was approaching him. Looking at him, I wondered who he was. Holding two swords in his hands, I understood that he had incredible strength. His face was iron, his eyes were glowing. He approached him, as suddenly he disappeared. His body was pierced, starting to run away. Chuck screamed in pain. Looking up, his stick fell. 6 days ago, he approached Sean. Putting his hands in front of him, he said that he could not reveal all the details. The guy was killing another, holding his head on the floor. There was a lot of blood. He spread his arms. It was Dimitri, who was seriously injured and could not participate in the next competition. Showing his fingers, he said that it would still take place as it should have. Remembering the headless chicken, he thought that they had victory in their pocket. Smiling and handing over the sheets, he said that there was another reason why he was called. Taking the paper, he asked what it was. Sean replied that this was an application for a transfer between squads because they wanted to join him. Reading them, he was told that he was known for being able to use the strengths of his fighters and the head of the 7th squad received only negative reviews. He thought that most of the second-year students wanted to compete on equal terms. Showing his fingers, he wanted to say how much time he had to think, but he was interrupted and answered that he would take everyone because he was not in a position to choose. Standing next to the guys, he greeted them in the 13th squad. He looked at them and said their name. There was also a guy with red hair whose name was Matthew. Raising his hand, he said that tomorrow would begin preparation for the competition and now he wants to look at their superpowers and determine their positions. Suddenly he was surprised because he was called. Looking at him, he asked what questions he had. Matthew wanted to ask him to take care of him because he was Korean. Getting angry, he said that nationality does not matter and if he wants to be taken care of, then let him prove himself and show what he is capable of, he answered, but again asked to be taken care of. Turning away, he said that he was suspended. Turning around, he swore. The two guys went and explained to each other what he said. An hour ago, 2 squads went to capture the flag. Clenching his fist, he said that they were trying to reduce their chances of winning and this is kindergarten. Approaching them, he asked not to relax because everyone was in the same conditions and it was better to wait until their eyes got used to the darkness. Seriously looking at them, they were told that one of the teams would go first and the other would be behind. Looking at the two, he said that they would attack from the flank together. Straightening his hand, he said that without Dimitri, the 5th squad was the easiest for the enemy, but they couldn't lose their vigilance and it was better to try to win. 10 minutes ago, the first team was moving. Raising his hand, he said that now they were. 5 minutes ago, the guy hit another. Standing with sticks, Chuck asked if all 5 were laid out. They answered him in the negative. He pointed his finger at the man with the flag. Sitting on the ground next to him were 2 swords. Standing up, he went to them. They asked if he just watched how his partners were being beaten. Suddenly, many of the guys were killed. The main character, looking at this, was very surprised. Pushing Chuck aside, he told him to step aside. Suddenly, he was hit and fell. Opening his mouth, he was surprised. Being near him, he thought that this was teleportation. Grinning his teeth and taking a stick, he thought that there was no time to even be surprised. Travis ran up to them. Grinning his teeth, he asked how they could even get close to him. Suddenly, he ran towards him. Jumping up, he decided to hit him. Travis jumped over him so that he wouldn't get hit. Poe looked up and swore. He was hit in the head from above. He stood next to the lying man and was silent. The guys in the room were talking because his name was Travis. Other people were also discussing him. He opened his mouth and thought that it really was him. During training, his central nervous system was damaged, which is why he lost the ability to speak. But immediately after that, his abilities began to develop at an amazing speed, so they began to experiment on him. They were third-year students and everyone was wondering if they could participate in the second-year competitions. He held a stick with trembling hands. Travis turned around and looked. The main character was trying to get up from the ground. Poe looked at him and said that he didn't know who he was, but he wasn't going to lose. They called him names while looking at him. The stick began to shine in his hands. The eyes also began to shine. The shining one raised the stick. With the skull on his head, he looked at him. Then he crouched down, holding the object in his hands. Then he ran at Chuck. Biting his lip, he realized that it was Travis and he was much stronger than all the second years. Standing with swords, he thought that he would not be able to win and what he would do. Sighing, he thought that if he did not block the attack, then he was finished, but he could not just lose. He thought that the skull covered about 15 meters per second and was unlikely to save energy and therefore now he should move faster. The goal of the competition is not to defeat everyone, including the guy, but to capture the flag. If he can install it, he will win. Looking at him, he sighed. He went and thought about when he would use his ability. Opening his eyes, he looked at him. Looking at the flag, he thought that this was visible from the blurry space around it. When suddenly, the aura began to leave. Spaces appeared near him. The skull tried to hit, but Chuck bent down. Travis was surprised. The guy was holding the stick with displeasure. He raised his head and had pendants hanging on his neck. He was hit on the chin with a hand. The hand was higher than the guy and he was looking at him. He looked at him with his mouth slightly open. Suddenly he fell and a foot began to trample him. Standing on it, he held a sword in his hands. Looking at him, he wondered. The other one was smiling. Taking the leg, he tried to remove it. He stood up and hit him on the head. An eye fell out of the mask because it no longer worked. Then he landed on the ground, holding swords. He was surprised and looked down. He looked at the guy who took the flag and said that after the blow he came to his senses in 3 seconds, but that was enough to grab the flag. Looking back, he smiled and said that they won. He clenched his hand into a fist because the second year had beaten the third year. Sweat was running down his face. He was angry. He bared his teeth in anger. Kyle was holding food in his hands and holding it out. A cat was coming up to him. Give him stroked and told to eat because next to his orphanage also lived a cat and they were similar. Opening his mouth, he said that he had no friends and outstanding talent too and did not look like everyone else. They came up to him. He pointed at himself and said that now there was something in which he is good and he has friends. Opening his mouth, he thought that he was a fool because he was talking to a cat and his abilities were cooler, then asked what he was doing. Looking back, he asked when he came. Matthew said that they can discuss something on the weekend. Taking him by the shoulder, he said that they do not have a deputy head in the squad. The cat was stroked against his leg. He said that he wanted to take this position and it would be good if he was supported. Angry, he shouted that it was enough to dirty his things. Then he hit the cat and asked him to get lost. Kyle, opening his mouth, was perplexed. The cat ran away. Kyle wanted to continue talking, but he was asked to move. They were standing opposite each other. With tears in his eyes, he began to get angry at him. He clenched his fists with apprehension. The trash can was moving behind him. It was swaying from side to side. Suddenly, it curled up into a ball. He opened his mouth and began to scream because an object was flying at him. With tears in his eyes, he asked him not to do that again. He ran away, while the other one tried to catch his breath because he was shaking all over. The cat was still running. He was outside the other guy's window. Dimitri seriously said that he did not think that he just came in and what he wanted at all. Chuck looked at him. With his eyes wide open, he said that these were only his assumptions because he was not telling them something, but now that he saw him, everything became clear. Clenching his fist, he asked if it was a third-year student. Sighing and holding his head, he said that he was the former head of his squad and third-year students were completely different. Clenching the bedclothes, he denied it. Trembling and baring his teeth, he said that he hadn't even had time to move and they had already smashed him. The main character had seen him upset for the first time. Raising his hand, he said that the guy seemed out of sorts, he looked like he'd gone crazy. Opening his mouth, he said that if he hadn't been like that from the start, it could have been due to training in his third year, and if you think about it, there is almost no equipment for third-year students and it's pretty hard to meet them. Opening his mouth, he said that moving to the second year is not difficult. Looking serious, he said that a real battle awaits them before graduation. Smiling, he agreed and it was interesting what would happen to them during the transition. There was a robot standing near the exit. There was blue glass on his face. His foot stomped and he went. Light was visible from the door. He was walking towards the exit. A cat was passing by. Kyle ran to him and shouted that he had found him. Viab asked if it hurt and if they went back, he would give him more treats. He was surprised with his mouth open. There was a robot standing near him and asking who he was. Looking at him, he said that the voice was very familiar. Suddenly, the mask came off. Smiling, he realized that it was John and said that he had changed and barely recognized him. It was evening. We were in the Arc Development Center. One was asking if he was lost because he had wandered far. Drinks fell out of the machine. Having given him one, he said that they would come for him soon and take him to the dorm and let him drink for now. Opening it, he asked if he was angry. Having presented him with carbonated water, he asked because he was here. Taking the towel, he said that the second generation tele-armor that he saw was still in the testing stage, but there would soon be a nuance and there was nothing wrong with seeing it a little earlier, because second-year students could not leave the Ark of their own free will. Looking down, he said that after the reinforcement, they could not leave the Ark unless they completely lost their combat capability. They were a resource. Looking to the right, he agreed with him. Kyle was surprised because he was told that those who get angry without reason are just sacks and complete fools. A man was walking behind him. He was wondering if the sergeant even understood what he was talking about. Looking back, he saw an old man asking if John had passed the test. He replied that he expected such a question and the armor reacts to telekinesis just fine. Holding a can in his hands, he said that it would be worth reducing the amount of material from the dragon's flesh for the internal system and it is important to increase its power, but if it is so sensitive, it would be more difficult to control. Putting his hand on his shoulder, he said that unlike them, the first generation, these guys would be able to calibrate their telekinesis as easily as taking a breath. Extending his hand, he greeted everyone and his name was Charles. Also extending his hand, he said his name. John replied that he had created the tele-armor. Raising his finger up, he said that the first generation tele-armor was assembled in a hurry, so it had certain flaws, and the second generation is much better and will certainly be a perfect weapon. Looking at it, he said that it was specially created for them and could barely control it. Kyle clenched his mouth and thought that he would have to put on the suit in which he saw the sergeant. He thought that he would stand on a cliff near the monsters and participate in a real battle.